Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the GSVS Career Development Series. Specifically, today our workshop will be titled Biotech Industry Jobs, Search and Skills. And this seminar is co-sponsored by the Academic Insight Seminar Series of the MD Anderson Postdoctoral Association, as well as the Association for Women in Science, Gulf Coast Houston Consortia. This seminar will be provided by Bill Lindstaedt, and he is the Assistant Vice Chancellor of Career and Advancement and International Postdoctoral Services at the University of California, San Francisco. Bill has been helping scientists and engineers advance in their careers for more than 25 years, and since 2001, he has served in various administrative roles in UCSF while maintaining an active career advising practice that focuses exclusively on the career development needs of PhD-level students and postdocs in the biomedical sciences. He had also helped develop particular expertise in working with trainees who are searching for jobs in academic and industry setting. And he is also the co-author of My IDP, which many of you are familiar with. It's a popular career development tool hosted by Science Magazine and CareerSide. And with this, his academic background, he holds a bachelor's in science in chemistry engineering from Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology, as well as a master's degree from the Joint Counseling Psychology and Higher Education Programs at Indiana University. So thank you once again for being here, and without further ado, Bill Lindstaedt.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the introduction. Ooh. Thank you. Can you guys hear me in the back? It's okay? Great. As I started, I did a workshop in the morning about academic careers. We're going to switch to industry careers. And like the workshop in the morning, this is not stuff that I made up to pass on to you. The whole afternoon is really built on sort of wisdom that I've gleaned from meeting with actually thousands of postdocs and graduate students now who are moving on to post-UCSF careers. I've been there 16 years at UCSF, and a big part of my job is meeting one-on-one with trainees as they're thinking about how to move on from their training roles at UCSF. And so over the years, I've just started to put together the collection of what I see work for all these people into advice sessions that hopefully you'll find useful in terms of planning your own exit from your training roles. So there's actually three sections to today's workshops for the afternoon. We're going to talk about first finding and applying for scientist jobs. So if you're thinking about moving into the biotech sector, how do you actually find job openings, and how do you successfully get through the application process for those? And we'll talk a little bit about resumes. We'll talk a lot about how to find scientists, because what I've noticed is 75% of the postdocs and graduate students I've seen get job offers would trace their job offer back to some intervention that some person, a scientist, another scientist, had on their behalf. So how do you find scientists at companies, even though you go to the company's website and they just have the vice president of research listed? How do you reach out to those people once you find them so that you make the best impression and you gather the best information? How do you put your materials together so that when it hits the hiring, the HR people's desk, it gets the best notice? So that's what we'll try to cover in the first section. The second section will be about interview skills, and the first one is mostly lecture. The second part is a lot of interaction, because you can't go to an interview skills workshop and not practice. So we'll have you practice on, write out some answers and practice how to respond to typical interview questions that biotech companies ask. And then the third part of the workshop is about compensation negotiation. So once you get your job offer, how do you ask for more? And we'll take at least a break in there, but if I keep talking, you might have to remind me to take a break. So if it feels like time, remind me it's time to stop. So in this first section about finding and applying for jobs, I guess the goals are kind of just to demystify the job hunting process. I know a lot of you have probably observed how faculty members get hired at academic institutions, and there's search committees that get assembled, and there's research statements and teaching statements and all these different components of the documentation that go into an application package for faculty positions. But how does it work on the industry side? You probably have less exposure to what happens there. So we'll try to demystify how that happens. We'll provide sort of a step-by-step process for how you structure your job search. Who do you talk to? How do you find those people? And what do you say when you find them? Because you'll hear me say multiple times that these job offers come from scientist to scientist connections, and you just really have to start creating those. I think everybody's received, if you signed up for this workshop, you've received in your email a set of these handouts, as well as all the handouts for the afternoon. In terms of agenda, we'll talk first about what you should know before you even approach the job market. So a bunch of activities you should do to just educate yourself about what is out there for biotech. We'll talk about how to find company information and how to find scientists at companies. And we'll talk about what to do with that information when you're just approaching the job market. It's important to start just talking to people. We call these informational interviews. I'll talk about that. And then when you're ready to actually start applying for jobs, how do you start converting those contacts you're going to make into help with applications? And then these workshops always work best when you just have a question and raise your hand, and I'll stop and answer it. So we have plenty of time for the afternoon. So my first point is that even before you start applying for jobs, you should be doing some research and learning what's out there in terms of resources, what types of companies are out there, what's the difference between a scientist position at a drug development company, a scientist position at a tools or instruments company. And a lot of this kind of information you can have by you can gain from doing some basic reading. One very big picture report about what's happening in biotech is an annual report done by the consulting firm Ernst & Young. They have something called the Global Biotechnology Annual Reports. You can Google those most recent ones, and you get kind of very big picture information. Where is money flowing in terms of types of disease-focused research, or what's the overall health of certain industry segments? Money's going away from discovery and towards tools or something like that. So you'll find just general information about what's happening and where the growth areas are, which can be broadly useful if you're thinking about how does my skill set apply in certain pieces of the industry. And then a little more granular level, sign up for the biospace.com the news feed, and this is just a portal for information about biotech companies, including jobs, but the news feed won't give you necessarily job postings. It'll just give you what's happening sort of company by company or sector by sector, subsector by subsector. So it's a periodic news that'll just show up in your email box, and it's pretty interesting to start reading. And the more you stay up on what's happening out there, the better prepared you'll be to talk about biotech business when you start going to your interviews and you're at lunch and people are talking about how this company is growing or that company's laying people off, and you'll know all about this stuff by reading that. And then probably most useful is get a copy of this book, Career Opportunities in Biotechnology and Drug Development by Toby Freedman. She's a biotech headhunter who is a PhD level molecular biologist herself. And she interviewed hundreds of people who work in biotech companies and made a book that takes apart a biotech company functional area by functional area and talks about where scientists work in each of those areas in the company. So what does a PhD level person do in a discovery research role? And how does that differ from academia? What people do in basic research labs in academia. How does that differ from the preclinical scientists, and how do those differ from the clinical scientists, and where might your interests fit? And so all this kind of information is really useful in that book. But also, she starts talking about differences between job titles. And so after you read through her book, you might have a much better idea of what's a scientist, how does a scientist 1 differ from a scientist 2, from a assistant director, associate director, director, vice president. So what in a typical biotech company, how are those things different? why you might want to know that as a job seeker is you see then a job for a scientist position at say a drug discovery company, you find a job posting for a discovery scientist at a drug development company, and you would see that that's going to be pretty much always a PhD required position. But that might be different at like an instruments company where they have lots of engineers who may have master's degrees at the scientist level. So when you see a job posting for a scientist, that doesn't always mean PhD. You need to sort of dig into that. So you'll have a lot of more information after you read this book about job titles and how companies are structured. Super useful. So you've done a little research and gotten a global picture of the job market out there. Then I think you should start turning your research, this pre-job application research that you're doing, towards your own interests and say, what are the 20 or 30 companies that I would most like to work? And maybe that's based on location, maybe it's based on company size. I want to work at startups versus big staid companies. Maybe it's based on the disease focus background that you have. And then make a research project out of it. Try to find the names of the companies, a name of a scientist whose work interests you at that company, and the contact information for that person. And then you'll use this table that you're going to develop with this information, company name, scientist name, emails, address for that person. You'll be able to use that periodically for different things when you're trying to set up these contact interviews. When you're starting to apply for jobs, you'll go back to those people. It'll be super useful to have developed this list and to keep it growing as you're going through your job search. So how do you find that information? Well, if it's a location search, there's in almost every major, in fact, I think now in every state in the country, there's a biotech industry organization. So even if the state has 10 biotech companies in the entire state, they have an organization. So you could find out if a geographic focus for yourself, what are all the companies that are members of these organizations. That might help you start to create this company list. Or begin with scientists and who has left your lab or left people's labs who you're familiar with, and start to putting those companies on your list. If you have a contact already at a company, I would say that's a great reason to put it on your preferred list to begin with. Biospace Daily Reading will turn up some of this information, journals, other news that you can find. I'll share some more things. If you can find so often public libraries or I don't know the library here, but it may have a copy of CorpTech, which is a really useful database for company research. It's not built just for job seekers, but it does give you a streamlined way to find, if you went to the technology sector of CorpTech, this is a database that you can sit down at a computer in a lab or in a if they have a subscription at your library and say, I want to find all the companies in the biotech sector under pharmaceuticals, and then use a keyword search that says, breast cancer. So I'm interested in doing work on breast cancer, and this would find all the companies that are in that giant database that fit that search criteria. Then if that's what you want to do, that'd be a great place to put that information on your preferred company list. For sure, your university library would have access to Lexisnexis Database, which is just a giant searchable database of news on the corporate world. And if you go to Lexisnexis, click on a company info link, it would take you to, and put into keyword search, you'd get tens of thousands of hits if it's a very broad keyword search. And you'd have to start reading through all the articles that match that keyword search list. And that would be very helpful at starting to develop this list of companies that are just working in the breast cancer space, for example. And then how do you find scientists at these companies? A lot of people don't think about using PubMed this way, but if a company has published papers, which many companies do, you'd be able to find under the affiliation link. So if you go to PubMed and put in, so Amyris is a Bay Area company that a lot of people want to work for. that I talked to. So if you put in Amyris as a search term and clicked on affiliation, you'd find all the publications affiliated with that company name. In this case, when I did the search, there were 5. And then you can look through the papers and find out who's doing work at this company that seems most interesting to me based on my background, because I'm going to contact the person who does most, whose work is most like mine. This is how the connection could be made with an industry scientist. So in this case, suppose it's Dr. Patel who published this paper. You could get their email address then from the corresponding author list, or even if there's somebody else you wanted to reach out to, you can assume that they all have the same convention. So if it's K. Patel at Amyris, but you actually want to reach Levy, it's probably S. Levy at Amyris too. So kind of sneaky, but a good way to start finding out where people are at companies. Even sneakier, but a little more work, you could just do a Google search for the term at abgenix.com, if it was this company, Abgenix, and you start to see all the hits that have email addresses in them, and then you're like, oh, must be first name dot last name at Abgenix. So now I can email anybody at that company once I know their name. So it seems impossible to find scientists and email addresses and contact information at companies because it's not on their website, but it's really not that difficult. So you can also use LinkedIn very effectively to find names and companies by searching for contacts and companies. How many people have LinkedIn accounts? Almost everybody? Awesome, great. How many people think their LinkedIn accounts could use a little work? Many people, okay, good. So get those spruced up before you hit the job market, because people outside of academia use LinkedIn way more frequently and for a lot more purposes than people inside academia, it seems like. But you can do keyword searches oh, sorry, it's different. This is a getting introduced. So you can get introduced to people through LinkedIn. And I actually think it's useful to pay the $40 a month for a few months of your job search to have premier access to LinkedIn, where you can actually use the tool to get introduced to people, especially for these sort of purposes when you get to the actual job application process. So we're going to talk a little bit about informational interviews, and if you're just trying to reach out and make friends at companies, I would not use LinkedIn. I would email them directly. But when you're applying for jobs, and I'm going to talk about how you should send applications directly to scientists within companies. We've had our postdocs and students have had a lot of luck using LinkedIn and a quick email. I'll say more about this later, that says, I've applied for a job at your company, but I'm contacting you directly through LinkedIn. This little blurb that you can write on the website to let you know that I think I'm a great applicant. I hope you look at my profile and pass my name along. So you think you're bothering these people, but it's really helpful. We'll talk about some more about that shortly. So you can get introduced to people through LinkedIn. Always write a personal message. Tell them how you're connected. But this is super useful. You can find jobs or people. So almost all of you probably use LinkedIn to look up a person. But if you look up a job title, so patent agents, life science, San Francisco, you'd start getting job postings for that if you click on the job category. But you'd also start getting connected to people who have that background or are in those jobs as well. And then we'll talk a little bit about informational interviews. How many people have done one of these before? A few, okay, not too many. All right, I'll talk a little bit about what these are then. So it's a great way to first generate career information, and then secondarily to generate job opportunities. So I think people who are desperate for a job next week, this isn't so useful. You should just email people directly and start saying, I need your help in getting me a job. But it's going to be more effective for you long term if a year or 6 months before you are desperate for a job, you start reaching out to scientists who have some kind of connection to you one way or another, scientifically or because you've met them before, you know someone who knows them, and start having a conversation about how they got where they are, what advice they would give you. Ask if you can have a copy of their resume to see how they pitch themselves. So basically, advice getting and information about how they've gone through their processes before. And so you're going to reach out to people who are scientists in industry and have jobs that you're interested in and ask them how they got there, basically. So the questions are, who do I talk to, how do I find them, and what do I say? We've talked some about this already, and now we'll talk a little bit about what you're going to say. First of all, it's not a job interview, so just relax when you have a meeting with one of these people. If it does happen to turn into a job interview, I've heard of this happening, then that's great. Do your best, but that's not what you should expect. It's basically a bunch of questions about career exploration, realizing that it might lead eventually to a job, so they know that you're sitting in a meeting with this person, they know that you're going to follow up with them someday and probably ask for a job, but this is not the time to do it. You're just learning about companies, people, and opportunities. My suggestion is to reach out to these people who you'd like to meet with, ask for an in-person or telephone or Skype call, tell them you'd like to talk to them for about 30 minutes, and if you can go to visit them at their workplace, it's really good, actually. And by the end, you should try to understand what that person's job duties are about, what skills got them to where they are, what background got them their job, what would be required to get the types of jobs that you're looking at, what does it take to succeed once you're there, what they know about future career prospects, so what companies are growing, what companies might be hiring, what's happening at their own company in terms of future hiring, and then ask them if they can give you references to any other folks. So this is if you cover all this in a 30-minute meeting, you'll get a lot done. The slides have been distributed, so I'm not going to go through all these questions, but here's a kind of a script that you could go through and from what they do day to day, their own career path, company-specific questions about where they work, network building questions. And so this is also kind of a good framework to follow. What they do, how they got there, what's happening at their company, and then can you talk to anybody else? And then how you get one of these. So I know this makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I know I have to talk to people in industry if I want a job in industry, but I don't know very many people. How do I get started with this? You just have to kind of jump in, and I predict you'll find it easier to do and more fun than you expect it to be. A lot of people in industry know that they could trace their job offer back to someone who helped them, and so from our alumni and folks at UCSF that we talk to who do a lot of these informational interviews, they're like, I feel like I need to give back. I enjoy mentoring. I don't mind doing this, especially if I can talk to someone during my commute, or I think you'll find more people willing to talk to you than you think. How you do it, I would email the person, ask to set up a time to talk. Use language like this. I'm beginning to think about making a change from academia to industry. I'm not asking you for a job. You should say that specifically. I'm asking for information, opinions on our field, what it's like to transition into this field. This is because if you just send them a note saying, will you talk to me, and they sense that you're job hunting, they'll be like, send your resume on to human resources. That's not a bad suggestion, but you want a meeting with this person. You don't want to get turfed off to human resources. By the same token, if you're the person who needs a job tomorrow, this approach comes out as sort of disingenuous, right? So can you talk to me today because tomorrow I'm going to ask you for a job. So make sure that you're actually being genuine when you make this approach. Let them know you'll be brief and structured. Offer, if it's going to be a face-to-face chat, buy them coffee or lunch. They're out there making lots of money. Hopefully they'll buy you coffee or lunch. So you get free meals out of all this. And then make sure you take notes during the informational interview and follow up. So I don't think I have a slide about this, but people love to get emails that are short emails, 1 or 2 lines, that don't ask them for anything and thank them. So this person's going to give you all kinds of advice because that's the purpose of the interview. So send an immediate thank you note that's very brief, but then 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, let them know that you did what they advised. So you suggested I talk with this person. fantastic advice, had a great conversation. Thanks again. Just wanted to say thank you. And then this keeps your name in front of that person, as well as lets them know you're dependable and really valued their work. Makes them more willing to help you if they felt like they were valuable to begin with. So there's the My IDP tool, as mentioned earlier. A lot of people don't catch this part of My IDP, but under the Talk to People section on the My IDP tool, there's a whole tutorial about informational interview, including questions to ask, sample correspondence that you can use in this process. But kind of along those lines, how you would ask for an informational interview, just this would be the person who's a cold email, for example. And you might just say, I've been reading about your work and the company that you work at seems really interesting. I'm reaching out to you because we share similar backgrounds. And then, I'm beginning to think about the next step in my career. I'd like to explore the potential paths available in corporate research. Obviously, you made a successful transition, so you're kind of making them feel good that you recognize their success. I was wondering if you'd be willing to meet with me and give me some advice. I'm not asking for a job. I'm just seeking some opinions. If you can meet me in person or by email, I'll be prepared to conduct a brief, structured informational interview. So I think this is a good letter. Typically what comes back then is, actually you'll probably have to ask 10 people to get 2 of these interviews, would be my prediction. So you'll get lots of nothing. You'll get a couple, I don't have time. And then you'll get a couple people willing to talk to you. So don't consider those who didn't say yes to be failures. Just keep going and get through that list that you've made of people you want to reach out to, and somebody will say yes. Usually somebody's like, great, I'd be happy to talk to you. And then when you're trying to set this up, this is a big piece of feedback we've gotten from lots of our alumni who do these for our students. They say it's really bothersome if the student comes back and says, great, can you meet at 4:30 on Thursday? They're like, I'm busy. So what? So students' schedules are relatively flexible. Postdoc schedules are relatively flexible. Give them a big box of time where you can be free to meet. So anytime during the week on afternoons this week, particular week, I'll be free. Can you tell me a best time for you, and I'll be there. That's probably a more welcoming way to do this. Questions about any of this so far? So the whole purpose of this is to start generating information, friends, and leads, which will happen when you start talking to them. You just have to get out there and do it. And then, again, write quick email letters and then do follow up periodically. A sample thank you letter also in your in the slide deck that's been distributed. Any questions about that? Okay.
How likely people from How likely will person from different city allow an informational interview?
Oh, so the question is about different geography. Very common, I think. So if you're asking for someone to talk to you and they're in Boston, how likely is it that they would say yes? I wouldn't ask for a face-to-face interview. But I have actually seen people who are planning to move to, say, Boston, try to set up a bunch of these during a visit. And then this letter, the invitation letter becomes, I'll be in Boston the entire week of June 13th. Anytime you could meet with me, I'll be there. So, but I think otherwise you'd ask for a Skype meeting, and that seems very common, or a phone meeting. Other questions? It really works if you start doing this. Okay, so we'll move on to job hunting techniques. So you've done all of this work to research the job market. You've done all your reaching out to people and started to develop your network. These people are going to help you. Now, what do you actually do when it comes time to start applying? Most people's your first thing is to go to Biospace or Monster or some big job search engine and rely on that to get you a job. I'm going to find the job offers there. And that's what these websites actually want you to do, because they get paid for having traffic and retention time on their website, et cetera. And I cut this out of Monster.com. This guy, Mike, applied for 10 jobs, got interviews for 5, and got 3 job offers. So this is how successful Monster will be for everybody. I'm not saying that they lied, but this would be an exceptional example of someone who just, went to Monster, applied for some jobs, and got a job the next day. But that is kind of what these places want you to think, because that's how they get paid, is if you spend more time and hit their website more often. So I think these websites, the job hunting sites, where everybody seems to just focus and spend all their job hunting time going through every 2 hours a day going through Biospace. You should use these sites, but it should not be the only thing you do. I think there should be 3 techniques that you use. One would be networking with these people. We'll talk about how to reach out to them more. Working with third-party recruiters, and then applying for these online postings that you see at Biospace or Indeed, or whatever these sites are. So we'll kind of take these one by one. And the first thing you'll want to do is go back to those contacts that you made before for informational interviews and start converting the questions to job hunting things. So it was very helpful to talk 6 months ago. I was wondering, now I'm actually starting to apply for jobs. I'm wondering if you could chat with me again and review my resume, or give me advice on how to improve my process. Along the way, you'll start asking about what positions are open, and eventually you'll start hearing about these things. So this is a numbers game, and most of the postdocs or students I've seen successfully move into biotech, they would admit that over their job search period of 6 months or more, they probably met more than 10 people. So I think 10 would be a low number from the folks I've talked to. Let's see, again, a lot of these articles, articles by Dave Jensen, who I think has spoken here not too long ago at least. He's a great resource, a writer on, he's a headhunter, also writes on science careers, has been writing there for years about job hunting in industry. And there's 3 articles that are pretty old, but super useful for picturing how you start moving these contacts you have from, hey, I'm just talking about your job and making friends, to I actually need your help in getting a job. And so look up these articles and read them. These 2 are actually written like a play. There's a back and forth of how these conversations are actually held, and who says what to whom. So super useful at understanding how to do that uncomfortable process of moving from I'm making friends to I need you to help me get a job. Another thing you'll want to do is work through third-party recruiters. And I don't meet with too many of our trainees from UCSF who get jobs from this, but some every year I talk to. And so these are typically all called headhunters or search firms. These are people, it's a third party that gets paid to locate and vet potential employees. So Genentech has a job opening that they've had for a while. They can't seem to fill it, so they're going to go outside to some expert in that subfield and say, hey, can you find us a great candidate, because we're not getting the applications through our own means. And so they'll pay that person perhaps in advance, and then again when they find the perfect person. Other times, so that's called a retained firm. So we've retained this expert in PK/PD work who's going to find us the perfect person, and when they find that person, we're going to pay them more. So it's probably, for a scientist position, it's probably $15,000 upfront and another $15,000 for success. So they make a lot of money off these searches. Contingency firms are basically doing what you as a job seeker are doing. They're going through websites and seeing who's posting positions, and then they call that company and say, hey, if I give you some candidates, some good candidates, will you pay me? This is a tough business. Most companies say no to this, but occasionally you'll find some who do. So you as a job seeker, if a headhunter calls you, the first question you would want to ask is, can you tell me how you operate? Because you want to know, are you already hired and you're like the HR department, or are you just trying to sample people and find out if you can source some candidates? They call it sourcing. that will, then get pitched to this company, and it may or may not be useful. If you don't have a job and you need a job, either one of these could be helpful, so I wouldn't keep my resume from them. But as you go through your career, you want to just start talking to these folks, because these people may not be that helpful to you. Another type of firm, which some of our postdocs and students have found really helpful, have been contract agencies. So these are typically, they call it temp to perm, so you might get a temporary position for like 6 months at Amgen, because someone's going on maternity leave and they have a bunch of projects that they need to be done. And then when that person comes back, you may or may not be moved to permanent within the company. So you might be looking for a job again in 6 months, but a lot of times those do turn into permanent, or if they're not permanent, at least you have a company name on your resume for the last 6 months, and you have a manager there who, even though you worked through this contract agency, your manager was still at Amgen, and you got paid through Amgen. So there can still be some good benefits to those. So that's kind of how these 3 types of firms work. I think one thing is, if you get a call from someone who says, I work in the employment consulting arena, and for $2,500, I saw one of these letters recently, will help you write your resume, introduce you to some contacts, and recommend some companies you might want to work for. Don't do that. So there's no, because they usually charge a lot. I've never seen those work out actually for people, and I think a consultant like that might be useful for people with very broad backgrounds, but when you guys all have highly specialized, advanced degree backgrounds, you're going to be able to do a better job of doing everything they do for not $2,500 than they can do for you. So don't pay people to help you find a job, except for Sina, of course. Yeah.
Explain again how we deal with the recruiter if they call us.
Yeah, so if a recruiter calls you, what to do? Yeah, first of all, I would ask them how they work. So can you just tell me how you get paid? And they'll say, oh, I've been retained by this company. They'll give you the company name. And then they'll say, would you be interested in being considered for this position? And of course, you should say yes. And then they'll coach you through, you don't have to do anything more. They'll coach you through the process. They'll get you feedback. We pitched your resume and 4 other people to this company. They really want to talk to you. Here's the things that the manager is looking for, and here's some things you might want to, so they'll coach you through the process. They'll even help with the negotiation in the end. So super useful if they're these folks. If you're a contingency headhunter, they'll say, hey, thanks for sending us your resume. We did our best to get it in the company. They won't tell you what company it was, probably, because then you would do that yourself. And we're waiting to see what will happen, and you may never hear from them again. But it's still one more view of your resume that they didn't have otherwise. Other questions about these people?
So how would you get your name to those firms?
Yeah,
So they could
great
contact
question.
you,
How do you get noticed? Because you want these people to call you, right? Go to meetings, especially meetings that attract a lot of industry people, so disease-focused meetings, for example. And you'll find that there are headhunters in specific fields. So 1, be visible, get known as an expert. 2, actively, where is that? I thought I had this in there. Somehow I took out a slide. Do a Google search for the words search firm and some scientific field, immunology, cancer biology. And you'll find people who specialize in these, and get your resume to those folks. So that's the develop a list part, but I thought I had some search terms in there. If you use the word search firm, immunology, you'll find things. Or executive search would be another keyword phrase to use. Sorry, I left that out. So my suggestion is get a list of 5 or 6 of these specialty firms. It's a passive kind of thing. Get your resume out to them. I'm looking for jobs. If you have anything, let me know. They'll put you in their database. Maybe they'll call you, maybe they won't, but at least you're in there. And the same thing with, oh, there it is. Okay, so I do have Google these things. I would say the same thing for these contract agencies. Like these are the biggest ones that I've seen: Kelly, Lab Support, Yo, Lab Pros, Kforce. Send a resume to their websites and see what happens. If they call you and you're like, I have a decent postdoc position, this sounds like it's going to move me across the country for 6 months, probably not worth it, but at least you had a chance to hear about it, or maybe you do want to take that one. So that's another technique. And then probably the thing that's most useful is doing a good job of answering these job postings that you see online. And most people, they find a job posting, they learn a little bit about it, they create their nice targeted resume and cover letter, and then they submit it, and it goes to some human resources black hole in the company, and you never hear anything back. What seems to be much more productive is if you go back to your ways of finding scientists at that company and send what I call a second application. So every job you apply for online should be accompanied by a second application directly to a scientist within that company. And this letter says something like this. I've been reading with interest about what's happening at your company, and I'm reaching out to you because of the work that you're doing. And then you get straight to the point. I recently noticed a job posting on the Abgenics website for a protein chemist position. I feel I'm very well qualified for it. I've already applied online, so don't send my resume to Human Resources, but I was wondering if you'd be willing to also send my resume to the scientist who is hiring for the protein chemist position. Or if you're that person, I hope you'll read my resume and consider contacting me for an interview. So you're not trying necessarily to guess the hiring manager, because that would be probably impossible, but you're sending a letter to someone who looks like they're kind of in the field by the research you've been able to do, somebody who might be connected to that department or doing the same type of work. You can find, based on LinkedIn profiles or your PubMed searches, and send this letter to them asking for the scientist-to-scientist connection. Would you send my application onto a scientist? Because all the scientists and all the companies will tell you, if I get a stack of resumes that have been screened through the human resource department, they're not scientists, they don't know how to vet good scientists, and I get one example from another scientist in the company, I'm always going to take the one, I'm going to look at the one first that came in through a scientist reference. So this is really useful. A lot of people think this is too forward, like, aren't I bothering that scientist? Their job is not human resources. But most of the scientists I've talked to in companies say, we want you to do this. And actually, I've talked to recruiters who say, great, a smart candidate will actually reach out to people in their specialty fields as well as the human resource department. It takes nothing for that person to delete your email if you're bothering them. But one thing I forgot to put in here is I would title the job, I would title this email inquiry about protein chemist position, something like that. So just a very broad email that, or a general title for the subject line. Let's see. So what else? Oh, I was just going to talk about how this works. Even though people feel like it's too forward, I bet. I mean, everybody tells me I'm more likely to get response back from this than I would do from the human resource folks. It's the scientists feel an obligation to help other scientists. They're more likely to go to bat for you. I talked to a postdoc not too long ago who was doing a very good job of keeping track of all his applications, and he used LinkedIn. So every time he applied for a job online, he also reached out to a scientist at a company, and he had reached out to 25 people and gotten a response from all of them. So sometimes it was just like, thanks, or forwarded your resume on, or hey, they might call you for an interview, or hey, I used to work as somebody at UCSF, how are they doing? They're starting that kind of conversation. I've also talked to one of our postdocs, applied for a job, emailed a resume to a scientist in the company who called her then and said, we've already filled that position, so we can't consider you for it, but I noticed you had 2 typos on your resume, and I figured I should tell you about that because that's not a good thing. So might get some friendly advice as well. So questions about this? the most important part about this part of the workshop. Seems doable? It works. It works. We'll wrap up this part of the workshop and take some questions after we sort of talk about how long this takes. Most people I talk to trace their search for a scientist position in industry to 6 months or more. But that doesn't necessarily mean they were gung-hoing it all for, like, doing it all in for 6 months. They'll probably say, I sent out a batch of applications, and I got distracted by this thing I was doing in lab, and nobody called me from that first set. So 2 months later, when I came up for air, I realized I needed to tweak my resume and do a better job of it. And then I got some advice, and then I started doing it better, and then I started actually talking to people like I was supposed to. So it's not necessarily taking 6 months of that's all you're doing, but because it tends to be an iterative process, you get better at it, you get more advice. The contacts you made 6 months earlier or even a year ago start to pay off. It usually takes quite a while. So the earlier you start with just making those basic, friendly, informational interviews to your network can really pay off. Another thing is to say, okay, I'm starting job search mode. I'm going to spend a reasonable amount of time total, 4 hours a week in job hunting. That's combined with, the actual 3 hours it took me to set up and have an informational interview this week and the 1 hour I spent on biospace. But try to keep the time in proportion to how effective it will be. And if 75% of the scientist jobs would be traced back to some other scientist, don't spend 3 of those hours on biospace. Spend 3 of those hours trying to make connections and 1 hour on biospace, if that makes sense. So questions about any of this so far? Seem doable? Okay. Often, since you didn't have any questions, I'll suggest some that often come up. Sometimes people talk about, I'll start with this one first. I'm just finishing my postdoc, or if I'm finishing my graduate work. I've read 20 job descriptions for scientist jobs in drug development companies. It seems like they all ask for some postdoc experience. Should I apply for those? So how many graduate students in here? Okay, how many postdocs? Great, okay, a third and 2/3. So for those of you who are interested, you're still finishing your PhD, I've seen a couple things. One, if you feel like you're a really good fit, so first of all, this seems to be the case. Like 75, 80% of the job postings for discovery scientists in drug development companies, they usually ask for postdoc experience. If it's a lot of postdoc experience and you're kind of a mediocre fit for the position, I would say maybe don't waste your time applying for that job. But if it says 0 to 2 years, count yourself as that 0 person. You're a good fit for the position, like a 6 or 7 out of 10 for the science and background of the position. You stand a good chance of moving into that role. So I would say apply liberally, but realize that a lot of times for these discovery jobs at drug development companies, they're looking for your ability to be independent. So have you proven yourself able to publish twice? For the postdocs in the room, the trends that I've seen have been not have you been a postdoc forever and gotten a bunch of big papers, but did you publish a paper as a graduate student? Did you publish a paper as a postdoc? As soon as you've done those things, you're ready for that scientist 1 level, first kind of scientist job in industry, where you're likely to have, like a tech working with you and a very, very small lab or group. And then I've also noticed, I think I mentioned this before, the word scientist in a drug development company versus a device or tools company can be very different. And so when our students come in and they sit down at an appointment, they're like, I'm finishing my PhD, should I be applying for jobs? I'm like, what kind of company do you want to look for first before you decide whether you need to do a postdoc or not? If they're like, well, I read all the jobs that I really want, I'm probably going to have to do some postdoc experience. Then the question becomes, should I do a postdoc in industry or academia? And I would say if you can get a postdoc in industry, great. Especially at a company that has a postdoc program. I've seen industry postdocs not go well for some of our alumni when it's a startup company. It doesn't mean that startup companies are bad, but if the company is, if they haven't thought what it means to be a postdoc, if they're like, we actually really want a person who's a fully formed senior scientist, but we want to pay postdoc money because we're a startup, that's a bad sign. If they haven't thought about what it means as a postdoc to be preparing for your next step because they really wanted a staff scientist, then when you start asking questions about how will I know if I've succeeded, am I going to get to publish my work? And they're like, no, this is intellectual property. That's a red flag, right? So they need to have thought about what a postdoc is and how they're going to mentor you and have you talk about your success when you finish this 2 or 3 year employment period. Sometimes postdocs in industry run straight into employment at the company. Genentech in the Bay Area where I live, they actively say we don't hire our postdocs, but we've seen some of the people that left UCSF and done postdocs at Genentech got scientist positions there. So that seems to not be an absolute rule. So I would say in general, if you can get a postdoc in industry, great. The numbers of postdocs in industry, though, are a tiny fraction of the numbers of postdocs in academia. So not to go too long about this, but I think there are some conditions if you're thinking about an academic postdoc that would most effectively tee you up for an industry position. So what kind of an academic postdoc could I do that will make me most marketable for industry positions when I finish that postdoc? These are the conditions that seem to be best from what I've seen our postdocs leaving. So the postdocs who leave UCSF, who get jobs the fastest, tend to come from disease-focused labs. So they can say, I'm a diabetes researcher, or I'm a cancer biologist. They work in labs where the PI has sent people to industry before, so alumni in industry, so you sort of have that built-in network when you're leaving. So check out those websites. They come from they're in geographical areas like the Bay Area or Boston or San Diego where there's a big biotech market, so I know it's growing here. But do some research like we were talking at the beginning and check out how many biotech companies are in the Bay Area and San Diego and Boston as compared to the rest of the country. And I think the Ernst & Young reports sometimes have that information, numbers of biotech companies by state. And the big biotech states dwarf the whole rest of the country combined. So if you're looking to finish your postdoc in a market that has lots of jobs in it, move to one of those cities for your postdoc. And then try to figure out publishing rates from the lab. So if you're going to a lab that is in a biotech area, disease-focused, sends lots of people to industry, but nobody leaves for 8 years, that might not be the best place because typically the job postings, the job that you're going to get after you leave that postdoc is probably the same job after 3 years as it would be after 8 years. So is that extra 3 or 4 years worth it? So if the PI says everybody gets a science paper before they leave or they can't leave, that might not be a good fit even though it fits the other conditions. Does that make sense? And then visa issues, won't go a lot into that, but I know at UCSF, 60% of our postdocs are international, so we get this question a lot. And my biggest suggestion is get a referral to talk to an immigration attorney early before you actually start applying for jobs so that when the question comes up in interviews, you can start by saying, I've talked to an immigration attorney and based on what they've assessed for me, it seems like my background would lend itself to an easy win on the visa market. So if it comes up for background check for what contributions have been to science, it looks like I'm a good bet for successfully getting a visa when they're available. So having a conversation that says I'm taking this into my own hands, I've already talked to some people, it looks promising, but I will need some visa support and I'm willing to take a big part in making that happen, is probably the best message. You also have someone here on your campus, Sina, who knows a lot about different visa issues, so make sure you're talking to him as well as your international office. So, those are typical questions. Uh-huh.
So for your words of advice about introductions and these emails and such, is that exclusive to industry positions in this country, or would that apply to industry companies internationally, or are there certain things that you should be aware of when trying to approach something like that?
Uh-huh. So is the culture of how industry science works in terms of job hunting the same in the U.S. as other countries? I haven't talked to, I don't have enough data from people who have gone to different countries, but I would say generally in Europe it seems like it, that the scientist-to-scientist importance seems like equally as important. I've seen some postdocs look for jobs in, the Basel, Switzerland is what Novartis and some other big company, right? That they also approach scientists directly for their, yes. So I would say yes, for European companies it seems to be the same. Other questions? Uh-huh.
What's your take on companies offer internship opportunity to PhD students, sometimes postdocs?
Great.
So would that be helpful to your next step, or it's
Yes.
just something?
Yes, absolutely. We have, at UCSF, we've had internship opportunities for the last 5 or 6 years we started a program, and not one of them has gone bad. They've all been helpful. I think by now we've had more than 100 students do internships, many of them in research settings. And yeah, great experience. Looks great on your resume, often does seem to turn into a job. If you get that opportunity, it's worth 3 months out of your, stepping away for 3 months or whatever that is, or if it's part-time, that's maybe even better. Uh-huh.
When would you advise to bring up that you need a visa?
When?
Yeah.
So the question is when to bring up that visa support is needed. So I won't get it. So oftentimes when you apply for that job online, they'll ask 2 questions. How are you currently on a visa, and will you need visa support? That's not the legal way of wording it, but that's what they're asking. I've talked to people who take different approaches to this. Some people say, I think if I check that I need support, you're not going to call me for an interview, so I'm going to not check that box and see if you call me. Seems like a good way to get an interview, but then it's going to come up at the beginning of the interview. So it looks like you're educated in another country, or they may, at some point it'll have to come up, and then it's an awkward conversation about why you didn't disclose at the beginning. So that's the first place it usually comes is the online application. If not, and your background implies that you might need visa support based on the countries you've been in on your CV or your resume, it'll probably come up at the beginning. So if it doesn't, I wouldn't bring it up. So I would bring it up after the indication is that you're going to need a job, that you're going to get a job offer. So there was a postdoc recently at UCSF who was interviewing at a small company. They had never hired an international person before. They didn't know that this could be a challenge in terms of visa issues. They gave her a job offer. She was like the person they wanted. And then she's like, well, I do need a visa. And they went through all kinds of hoops to get her a visa. Ended up with an O visa when H visas weren't available. And if she had told them that at the beginning, maybe they would have still hired her, but it worked out better for her, I think, because she withheld that. So if they don't ask you, don't bring it up. Don't put it on your resume because they'll ask probably, but it's not going to help you, so I wouldn't put it on there. Any other questions? So I think we'll take, one more.
Is it ever too early to seek
One
those
moment.
information?
Remember to
Oh.
speak into this so that it can be recorded.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Is it ever too early to seek an informational interview?
No. I think if you're a first-year graduate student, do it now.
What if I'm not a graduate student?
Say what?
I said, what if I'm not a graduate student?
If you're a first-year postdoc, still not too years in advance is great. Yeah, I think there's not a too early time. And I think the earlier you start talking to people and the more open you are to different types of interactions that you could have with them going forward, the more fruitful it might be. So I've seen people do informational interviews, and then the person you're talking to realizes that you have some skill set that they could use, and they're like, hey, we got a little extra project you could do on the side. Great. So they see how dependable and smart you are, and as things come open, you start that relationship. I've seen informational interviews turn into collaborations between the company and the postdoc's lab. So yeah, and that wouldn't be possible if it was 2 months before you need a job, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
So, how does it work? For example, you're a PhD.
Oh.
So how does it work? For example, that you are a PhD from a different country, and for some reason, like you haven't got any luck of finding a postdoc here. So and like time is passing by. So how likely is it for you to just get a job when you are a PhD from a different country? You have your visa here, but you don't have any chance of having a postdoc here.
So should you want to do a postdoc, but you haven't gotten a postdoc position, and you're
not necessarily postdoc, like a job, like obviously industrial biotechnology job or something. Obviously a scientist research job, like without a postdoc, or like but your time has gone now. Like you have like 3 years or 2 years of not having a job, even postdoc or a job. So is it possible for you to still get a related job in the industry?
I think I understand the question. So you finish your training. How big of a gap can you have on your resume before you're not marketable? I think people are good for. I would find something to do to stay involved or get back involved with science, with the practice of science. 2 years would be a long time to be out of science and still be marketable for independent scientist positions. But I think I've seen people take a year off for sure and still be marketable.
But in the meantime, you're just applying, but you're not having any luck or any like connection that can get you a job or a PhD or a postdoc.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Follow up with me on one of the breaks, okay? And then we'll try to address it.
My question is, for example, you're a PhD from a different country.
Uh-huh.
You're here and you're applying, like since you came here, you're applying for a postdoc or a job or something. But because of this networking thing, and you're a PhD from a different country, you're having a hard time finding a job. And now time is passing by. So is it like, now how likely is it for you to get a job when you have this big of a gap?
Yeah, I don't want to give unhelpful information, but I think it depends totally on the situation and what your field is and how marketable that field is, and a number of different things. So this is a really good reason to make an appointment with a career advisor and really dig into a specific situation. I'm happy to talk to you during one of the breaks, but yeah, sure. Speaking of which, I think we'll take, let's come back at 2:15 and we'll start talking about interviews and resumes. Hello everyone, we'll get started again. I wanted to say a few things about resumes, and then we'll jump into interview skills. And rather than do a lecture on what should go into a resume, I thought I'd show you some samples. So if you go to my office website, if you go to UCSF or career.ucsf.edu, click on PhDs, and then NAC for us is non-academic careers, CVs, resume, cover letters. You'll get taken to this page where we have some things that you might find useful. And one of them is some sample resumes from different types of positions. These are resumes that we've taken from people who have been successful on the job market. And I thought I'd just point out a few things that people who write successful resumes tend to do if they're looking for industry jobs at the bench. So these are real resumes. We've obviously taken the names, and Kofi Annan didn't really train at UCSF. But one thing people do is write a profile statement. So the very first section of your resume, and this is because this section has two purposes. One is the human resource person who is not a scientist and needs to make sense of your background in the context of the job description. And so you can see how the structure of a profile section should be sort of your field or subfield with a little bit of more information about your specialized background. So this person's can you see this in the back? Okay. Protein biochemist with 13 years of experience in academia and industry, studied several different proteins and peptides, employing a wide variety of biophysical and biochemical methods. You get a picture of how to put that person in a box and then a sub-box, right? Category and subcategory. And then some bullet points to go in there. So structure is category, subcategory, and a statement with some bullet points. And these can be often just lifted directly from the job description. So the goal of this is for, if you have a well-crafted profile and you tailor this every time you apply for a job so that it looks just like that job posting, you're more likely to make it easy on the human resource person. They don't have to try to intuit that all this information about what you've done in the past means that you're qualified for that job. You're just saying, I meet the qualifications of the job description. I talked to lots of postdocs and students who tailor every cover letter but send the same resume for every job. And I'm not sure why that is the sort of myth that that's what you should do, but it almost seems the opposite. Industry people tell us they tend not to read the cover letters until afterwards, after they're interested in you already. But what gets them interested in talking to you is what you say about yourself in your resume. Most resumes should be 1 to 2 pages long for industry scientist positions. And you should include your complete publication history for scientist positions. And then a couple other things to point out here. A lot of people put professional experience and then everything they've ever done. I think you should divide it up. In this case, this person had research experience, and notice how they describe their research experience. It's not just, here's the title of my project, but they did some description. We anonymized some things in here, but you can see how they gave some description of what they did, and presumably this person stressed what's important to the job in relation to that job rather than what's important to their background. So one difference between a CV and a resume is a CV is like everything you've ever done. A resume focuses on the work that you've done, that highlights the work that you've done that's relevant to the position. Which is another thing, back to your profile. If your PhD work was in one field and your postdoc work was in another field, and the job you're applying for would value the postdoc experience and not the PhD experience, just in this profile section, focus on the work that's relevant. You can say what your PhD work was about down here, of course. One thing about this resume, most people put their education second before their research experience, but there's no rules. This person actually put their education on page 2 because they didn't want to highlight at the very beginning that they were from another country and were going to need a visa. The company's still going to figure it out, so I don't know if that was the best strategy, but they got a job. Another thing that most people put on their industry scientist resumes is a technical skills section with these sort of subheadings. This person edited quite a bit. He had a big laundry list of things he could have put in there. I've heard 2 conflicting opinions. I don't know which one's right. Some people say put everything in there because even if you don't get this job, your resume would go into a database in the company and they might keyword search it later for something that's not relevant. That's probably good advice, is to put the whole laundry list. He did not do that. He tried to focus on the things that would be most relevant to the job posting that he was applying for. And then publications typically go at the end of the resume. And this person actually put in references, but again, it didn't keep him from getting a job, but I don't think it's necessary to put your references in the in the resume, which is important because some of you probably don't want to tell your PIs you're job hunting, right? And so you don't have to put any references in there, and it will not seem weird that they're missing, because in academic settings, oftentimes the first thing that your PI got your resume for your postdoc position, and the first thing she did was call somebody else and ask about you, right? In industry, it's the opposite. They're going to go through your resume and a screening interview and another interview on the phone, and then a full day visiting the company, and then they're going to call you and say, you're our top candidate, we're going to check your references, and they want to call those people. And at that time, that's when you can say, and they'll ask you for your references at that point, or sometimes they'll ask you to write them when you are there visiting for the interview. But one way or another, this is a time when you will have talked to somebody, and you can say, you'll notice I didn't put my PI down. That's because I haven't told that person yet that I'm job hunting, and I prefer for them not to find out until I'm sure there's a job offer, and then I'll tell them that I'm going to be leaving. But I prefer for them not to know. And that's not going to sound weird to an industry person, because when that human resource person that you're talking to is like, I'm at Genentech now, but I kind of want to go to Amgen, they're not going to go to their boss and ask permission, right? That's like a weird academic thing. So they're not going to think it's unusual that you prefer for them to talk to other people about you. So they'll say, oh, terrific, no problem, but we do need to talk to somebody who supervised you in the past. So that's when you'd give your PhD advisor or some other former supervisor.
Is it acceptable to just put a link?
Oh yeah, I keep forgetting to.
Yeah. Is this on?
I think it
is
is.
it okay to just put a link for all your publications so you don't have to take up the space to list them?
No, I don't think so.
No.
For a non-scientist job, I would say yes. For a scientist job, I would have the whole list in there. But a lot of people do at the heading. A lot of people do put a link to a website that may have more information about what they've done, but not necessarily just your publication history.
Kind of on a similar vein, if you have, for example, publications that are not, from like undergrad that you happen to get tacked on that aren't really related to your current research, should you still include those? Should you include your full publication history, or kind of tailor it again for the position that you're looking at?
I think at some point you can put a reference to a link, or just say full publication history, including 13 papers, and so you could go that way. But you'd want to put the most recent papers and the most important papers for sure on your resume. But yeah, so if you have some papers that are not related, or so long ago that it doesn't seem like a big contribution, you could probably summarize those. But it is a big sign of productivity, right? So you want to get credit for all that. The same thing goes for presentations. Industry scientists tell us, like the presentations you've done, like this take up a lot of space on your CV, on your resume, and we don't care that much. But maybe if there was something that's a signifier of prestige, like you were invited at an international conference, then do put those bigger ones on there. But every time you give lab meeting, no, sorry. I've seen it.
So I have a question. I'm under the impression that resumes need to be very short, or maybe only 2 pages. What is your opinion about that?
So for industry scientist jobs, if you go on to 3 pages, I think that's okay, but usually people can get it pretty much put together in 2 pages, I guess. Even people who have a few papers can usually get it together in 2 pages. So there's no rules. You'll see if you go look for general job hunting advice out there on the web, they'll say resumes always have to be 1 page, no matter how senior you are. That might be true for some fields, but for scientist positions, like how are you going to get all that important stuff on there about your productivity in 1 page? So almost everybody I've seen has multi-page resumes. You got.
So if by the time that you are hunting for a job, like your publications has not been like accepted yet, or you don't have like a long list of publication, will that be a problem?
if you're looking for an industry job, an industry scientist job, and you don't have a long history of publications, will that be a problem? Not necessarily. I've seen people get postdoc. I've seen our excuse me, like a postdoc get a position that looked fairly senior. So you would expect that person that gets that job to have had time to publish. This person didn't have any papers from their postdoc. Things just hadn't gone well or hadn't gone as expected. And so there were no papers yet, but he was a great fit for that job, and he had a particularly close skill set, interviewed really well, had good recommenders. When they talked, like, this guy did everything right, it just didn't go well. He's a good scientist, got the job. But usually, I would say the biggest trend I've seen has been publish at least one paper from each stage of your career. And even if that's just one paper from your PhD work, if you're a good fit for that job, it's more about fit and science and techniques fit and personality and how you fit, which we'll talk about in an interview section.
I have a question. So as I'm looking for jobs, I'm seeing a lot of jobs that say, strong oral communication or communication skills. So I'm wondering, how important is it if you receive like national funding grants like NIH or awards for oral presentations or presentations that are at the national level? How important is it, and where on the resume would you include those things?
So an indicator, getting awards for presentations or grants as an indicator of your good communication skills, where would you put that? I would write it in the profile section and be specific about it. So not everyone who reads your resume recognizes that getting a grant means you're a good writer, which it does, but you would have to, I would write that explicitly as a bullet point that says, did this person write it? No, I would say, outstanding communication skills demonstrated by success in grant writing and award winning presentation, or something like that, and then make sure those specifics are referred to later in the document. But in general, this brings up a good point about resumes, which is the job of the resume is to get you the interview. And then a lot of those things that they put in the job description about communication skills and teamwork skills and working with people, they're going to dig that out through the interview process. And we'll talk about which kinds of interview questions lead them to feel like you're a good personality fit and team player. So most of the time, they're not going to contact you for an interview because you wrote that grant. But that might, which is also why you need to specifically say it. They're going to contact you for the interview because you're a good fit for the science and the techniques and the background knowledge for this position. And then they'll pick out the stuff from the interview. I wanted to point something else out about another sample that's on our website. So this person was not a famous soccer player, but we did change the names and the dates. They also didn't list names of all the languages here. At the time we asked this person to use their documents, they were like, this is so specific that it could be identifiable. So we didn't put all their languages that they know there. The point of this document was, though, that this person's a molecular biologist, sort of a formally trained bench researcher who was trying to get like bioinformatics jobs, but he was a self-trained bioinformaticist, and he kept applying for bioinformatics jobs with a resume that kind of screamed, I'm a cell biologist who does some bioinformatics on the side. And so when he redid his resume to really highlight his bioinformatics background, even though it was not formal, he started getting interviews and job offers. So some of the things he did, and the point in telling you this is you can tell a story about yourself that that benefits you in the best way if you're really careful. So he, right at the beginning, said, I'm a PhD level biologist with a background in bioinformatics. And then this first section that you see on the resume is all about his skills. And then he had a whole little section about bioinformatics accomplishments. And then, oh yeah, I do some wet bed stuff. And this piece about his sort of soft skills as well. And then as you read down here, he broke his experience up into 2 sections. And we took the dates off of this, but his bioinformatics experience, which he said a lot about, maybe even too much, half a page about these projects that he was doing in his wet bench lab that were kind of side projects as a bioinformaticist. Lots of information about those. And then he had another section for laboratory research experience, which duplicated the job and time. So if you look carefully, this David Beckham PI was his boss twice on his resume, even though it was the same time period. Then he also had a relevant training section, which I might have called, like, separated out the computational or bioinformatics training. And so he went on to 3 pages as well. But the point of this resume is to show that with a well-crafted summary section or profile section and then some really good headings, you can make yourself look like what you want to be known as. And so some careful examples there. The last thing I'll show you before we go on to interviews is the importance of tailoring your application materials. So I think as you read the job description, put yourself in the shoes of the recruiter and say, what are the phrases or keywords or qualifications that I'm most likely going to be looking for based on this job description if I were the recruiter skimming through 100 applications for a position. Make that list and then write your profile summary so that it makes you look like that list that you've created. And then go through the rest of your resume and say, now that I've said this about myself in the summary section, what else do I need to say in my bioinformatics section or my lab, my different sections of my resume, so that the whole story goes together? Because if I've written the summary or profile section well, my resume is going to get noticed by the human resource people, and maybe it'll go on to the scientist. But then the scientist will probably read the rest of my resume more carefully, and that's where I need to have the whole story supported. So that's kind of the order. Make your list of screening criteria, write your profile section to fit it, and then support your profile section with the rest of your resume. So if you want to go through that with some examples, we have kind of a tutorial on our website that can help you do this. So it goes from how to read an industry job description and understand what it is they're really looking for. We post the job post. There's a real job posting. One of the counselors in our office annotated it and said, "Here's what the message is from this," and then what you might start to craft in the different sections of your resume. Here's how you might write a cover letter that fits that job description. You know, you ask for these things. I have these things, even though it's some duplication with your resume, and then how to target your industry cover letter. So it annotates that letter, and then presents the resume with annotations for why this person also did this. So it can be really helpful if you're figuring out how do I start writing these really carefully tailored resumes for industry scientist positions. Questions? Uh-huh.
Since the previous session, we talked about working with recruiters.
Uh-huh.
How do we write a resume for recruiters' purposes?
How do you write a resume for? Oh, so if you're writing something where there's not an actual job posting, right. You're just trying to broadly look marketable. It has. It's not so different, except your profile section is just going to be a lot short. It's going to be very short, probably just that one statement where you're categorizing and subcategorizing. You would definitely want to have your papers, I think, in there so that they can see your productivity. But that's about all I have to say about that one, I guess. More generic. If you don't know what you're applying for, it can't be super specific. Great. Other questions about resumes before we move on? Okay, we'll start talking about interview skills. Make sure I have the right file here. Yes. So what we'll talk about is sort of the anatomy of an interview, what happens in an interview setting, and then typical opening questions, and then interpersonal and team skills questions. what happens in the phone interview, and then some difficult questions or situations that might come up in an interview setting. And along here, I'll have you write and practice a little bit to get the feel for how some of these resume or some of these questions can be answered. I'll try to provide sort of frameworks for, this is a behavioral skills question, therefore I need to apply this framework, or this is a question about an opening question about tell me about yourself. Here's the framework I should provide. So I'll have you practice those a little bit while we go along to help you hopefully remember those. So what happens in the hiring process? We went through a little bit of this already. Your resume goes into, application goes into the human resource department. That person gives a very fast skim of it. If they feel like you're a good fit for the position, you go to the hiring manager who is a scientist and can make sense of all of the information on your resume. Either that person or the human resource person will call you for a screening interview if they feel like you're a good fit. And most of the time there's a couple of these before you get invited for the full in-person interview, where there'll probably be a job talk and you'll be shopped around to 4 or 5 different people, and it's usually a half day to a full day. And then from there, they'll check your references and do a job offer. The feedback we get from HR people is that tons of applicants come in, but that shouldn't be discouraging to the job hunter, because most people, most job postings draw a majority of applicants who are not even closely qualified. People go through the website. I've seen this hiring people at UCSF. People who are not even remotely qualified apparently just go through the website and click on every job that they want to apply for. So usually there's 30 people who are, a third of the people are roughly qualified. They interview 3 to 7 applicants, bring in a couple people, and then finally make one final job offer. And oftentimes when you get to this phase, sometimes they sequence it, so you might be the only person that get pulled in for the full day interview. And if you get the job offer, great. If not, they go to the next person. Other times they're doing it in parallel and bringing several people in the same week. The purposes of an interview, for the employer, the longer the interview process goes on through that cycle, the more it is that they're getting away from, can you do the job? In other words, do you have the scientific and technical skills to meet the job requirements? And the further they go towards, are you a good addition to the team? Are you the person that we want for this job? So at the beginning, especially with the scientist who calls you, it's probably mostly about the projects you've worked on, and here's a problem we're working on, how would you approach that? And then the farther you go through the process, the more likely it is they'll start asking you some of these behavioral kinds of questions or background questions that we'll get to. But you also have priorities, and the first is to find out if you'd like to work there and to get the offer. And sometimes I talk to people who are like, well, I got invited for an interview, but I'm really busy. I'm not sure if I should go. Or they want a job talk and I'm not ready. Should I turn it down? Just go. Like, you can't turn down a job offer you don't get, right? So, and you can't get a job offer if you don't interview. And it's all really great experience. And I rarely find people have good reasons for turning down opportunities to interview. So I think it's all really good experience to go through.
It's kind of like workshop, it's not work internship, but the recruiting director want me to apply for the full-time interview this fall. And I'm kind of early graduate student, I just finished my second year. And I feel still busy, I mean everyone's busy, but I just worry about if I go there and then didn't get an offer, and then I can reapply the job like next year or so.
Right. So you did an you were an intern at this place, and they offered you a chance to interview for a full-time job, but you're only second-year graduate student.
Yeah, but they say yeah, but the problem is if I reject it, there's no other way to apply that job next year or so.
Right. I would have so that might be one of those times where you'd want to turn down the opportunity to interview, but I would have a chat with them first and talk about how important it is. I assume you want to finish, how important it is for you to finish your graduate work and get the degree, and ask if there's any way to, are there any ways I can have both things, because I'd also love to interview for the job. Just see what advice you can get from the company first before you make a decision about which to do. But if they're like, nope, that job starts, in 3 months and you're gonna have to quit your program to do it, I'm not sure it's worth it to interview. So that might be one of those cases.
So I have a question on the employer section. So you mentioned 2 points, and from what I understand, most of the people who apply the job, they will be, from what I'm understanding, they will be able to do the scientific technical job properly. But how important do you think because you talk about, if you are a good person or not to work on the team, how important do you think that would be when they are hiring people?
Yeah, super important. So, right, what gets you to the interview, and maybe even to the final interview, is all about your science. But what a lot of companies tell us is, when it comes down to the 3 people who we know could do the job, then it's a matter of trying to, as objectively as possible, pick out who's going to be the best fit with the team. And specifically, pretty much all companies that have a human resource function, if they're big enough to have a human resource function, they're going to have this behavioral style interview, which we'll talk about in a minute. So how they do that is somewhat objective. Interviews typically go like this. They'll have some kind of opening or agenda setting questions. Then they'll move to the science questions. Then they'll get to these interpersonal and team fit questions, and then give you time for your questions. And I put a line through this one because I'm for sure the least qualified person in the room to tell you how to answer those. So we're going to skip science questions, but I will say that all the students and postdocs I talked to, like, that actually is kind of fun. Part of the interview is we got into interesting discussions about where this company could go, or problem solving or troubleshooting questions about how I solved this problem or that problem. When I gave a job talk, it was really interesting to hear their perspectives about my research. So this part actually isn't what makes most people nervous, it seems like. It's these other parts, and so we're going to focus on those. But if you try to organize your interview preparation with this agenda in mind, you'll be most likely to be as prepared as possible. So we'll dig into some of these different kinds of questions. These opening or agenda questions that, in one form or another, almost always get asked. One is, tell me about yourself. 2 is, why are you interested in this position or the company? Why do you want to leave academia? Kind of a scary negative question. And where do you hope to be in 5 or 10 years? And so I'll try to give you some background or what seems to work on a lot of these. Let's see. And what I'll ask you to do first, I think, is take a moment and create for yourself a dream job description. So I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes and write down the kind of job title you're going for and the type of organization, so big company, small company, startup company, what they do, drug discovery work, drug development company, what type of background and job title, the required qualifications. So I want a job that's going to really benefit from my ability to do these things. So I'm going to apply for jobs that have those required qualifications. Type of science or task or activities. And then we're going to have you build some of the interview responses around your ideal job description. So take 2 or 3 minutes and write down your ideal job description. Questions? Does it make sense? Or if you're actually on the job market now and there are some jobs you're applying for, just go to your laptop or your phone and pull up that job description. probably better than coffee this time of day. You guys don't need these, do you? Can you raise your hand, please, if you need another minute? Most people done? Okay, great. So now, presume you got an interview for this job that you just wrote down as something that you would like to do in the future. And the first question is almost always, tell me about yourself. So they call you on the phone, and the interviewer, probably an HR person, but sometimes a scientist directly. Why don't you just start by telling me a little bit about yourself? And often people say way too much. That's probably the most common mistake, is they actually think that you think that the interviewer really wants to know everything about you. But actually, they just want to know about you in the context of this job description that you're applying for, right? And so a good structure is to a brief background of your academic training, super brief. So categorize yourself, subcategorize yourself, and then we call this the pivot, a pivot, which is you're pivoting from yourself to the job description. So directly say, I'm interested in, or I think I'd be particularly good at this job because of this. So I'm this kind of a scientist, I've been working in this area, and I've actually the reason I think I'd be really great at this position is because I'm doing this particular thing. So I'm a PhD level biochemist, currently a postdoc at UCSF. For the past 5 years, I've been studying cancer biology, a little more detail than that, and I'm really interested in this position because it would allow me to use my skills in this area that I've been working hard at for the last 3 years. That equals a good response to the tell me about yourself question. So now what I'd like for you to do is take a moment, look at your job description and say, how would I answer this question with this framework for that job description? And you don't have to write it out word for word, but put the bullets down at least. guys ready? Okay. So as a demonstration of how challenging it is to do this, if you can write it, we can talk about it. I'll have you practice by getting in pairs. Try not to increase the two. You may have to turn to the person behind you. And one of you will be in the role of the interviewee. One of you will be in the role of the interviewer. So you would ask me, thanks for coming in today. Why don't you just tell me a little bit about yourself? I would say, okay, actually, sorry, back up. First, take a minute with each other and explain the job description, because you want your listener to be able to see how you're mapping this to job description. So share with each other the job posting that you wrote for yourself, and then do the practice. Okay, well, so far I haven't said anything. Is it on now? Okay, so one person will say, tell me about yourself after you've introduced the job descriptions, and I would listen to what you say if you're telling me about yourself, and then I'll give you a little bit of critique on how the response mapped to the job description, as well as sort of length and delivery. Was it too much? So give some positive critique and try to give some constructive critique as well, and then switch positions. And I'll give you about 2 minutes per person, so try to go pretty quickly through this. Okay? So first share your job descriptions, and then go to the mock interview settings, and then switch people. Okay? Go ahead and start. Do people need partners? Can you work? Can you two work together? You two work together. We have a practice. Okay. Can you work? Can you work with her? Thanks. We have an odd number, so you guys will have to be.
I actually have to go.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I just want to make sure because.
Okay, switch partners. Other person gets to talk to. Other person gets to talk. 2 more minutes. Let me take this opportunity. We'll go ahead and move on. Thanks everybody for participating and giving good advice to each other and supporting each other. So one of the things you probably realized was writing it down was a lot easier than saying it, right? We don't have time in this workshop, but sometimes we have people switch partners and do it again, and the feedback's always, oh my gosh, the second time was exponentially better than the first time. So find partners, get advice, and practice these questions that we're going through here. We won't practice, we're not going to practice every one of them, but these questions that you know you'll be asked, why not draft out some responses and do a little practice. Don't practice so much that you sound absolutely memorized, but do practice some. Any questions that that exercise brought up for you? Okay, great. We'll move on. So another question that will frequently get asked is, why are you leaving academia? It's a negative question, right? And so some people fall into the trap of giving a negative answer. And so don't say what you're moving away from, if you can avoid it. Instead, focus on what you're moving towards, what's attractive about industry. And this would be a great time to focus back on those informational interviews you did earlier in your job search process and say, well, from the people who have moved on before me to, positions like this, here's what I understand are the most attractive things, and this is why I want to move towards, a position in academia, or in an industry. Sometimes people talk about, for my own career goals, I want to work on the, more applied nature. I've been working in a very basic setting. I understand that it's more team-based, and I would value that. I think the fast-paced nature of industry research would be attractive to me. But it's so much better if you say, and I've verified this by talking about it to a bunch of people who say this is really what's rewarding about this environment. It's okay to be realistic about academia. So you could say, sometimes I find the pace of academic research to be slow or isolating, and I'd rather work with a team. So you can say, reflect on some objective things, but you would definitely want to stay away from negative things about people or whatever. So bad thing to talk about. Don't talk smack about your PI in an interview. Here's an example. We won't practice this one, but maybe the response, why you're leaving academia? Well, I've realized how much I enjoy working towards goals as a member of a team. And while my time in academic research has been rewarding and I've been productive, the further I've gone along and the more independence I've gained, the more isolating my work has become. So I've had long conversations with others who have moved from UCSF, to industry settings. And it's clear to me that moving to an industry environment will allow me to balance my love for research with the opportunity to work more closely with others. So maybe a little wordy even, but conversational and sounds credible, like this person's actually thought it through. Questions about that one? Oh yeah, I keep forgetting.
So in my case, I have worked in a very translational lab, and so we have a lot of teamwork. We have very applied nature of our research. So in that case, I don't want to come out and say, well, the reason I'm leaving is because the pay is low and there's no room for advancement. Because that's really the reason. But I don't know how to word that correctly.
Yeah. Well, so that gets into the perhaps okay to be a realistic part. So most likely the person you're talking to has been, an academic researcher, right? You're talking to people who have PhDs, hiring scientists. I think you could mention first the piece of it about advancement, and say, and it's not that there's no room for advancement, because that almost sounds bitter, but you could say, I think the opportunities for advancement based on the people I've talked to are much greater on the industry side, and along with those goes, the opportunities for advancement because I am ambitious. Along with those go, the opportunity to earn more money, which is not a bad thing when you're coming from a postdoc position or whatever. So you can kind of refer back to it, but slightly different wording than you. Yeah. The longer someone's been in academia, the more stringent these questions are. I hear back from our postdocs and students. The longer if you've been a postdoc for 7, 8, 9 years, the message you may be sending to people in industry is that you really wanted to be an academic, but maybe you're applying for jobs, and basically they don't want to hear that they're second best. I'm leaving academia because I couldn't get a faculty job. It's a terrible answer, because people don't want to hear they're second best. So, why are you interested in this position? It's a question about what motivates you. You can focus on the job description, so the basics of the job for the initial interviews, but then multiple people are going to ask you this throughout the interview process, and so the more you go through the process, the more you're going to learn about the job, and the more you can refer back to what you've learned, and mention that those people, when I was talking to Jane earlier in the day, she mentioned the department focuses on these kinds of things, and that's fantastic. That's what I'd really like to work on, even though those weren't in the job description. So you can make this question, you can modify it as you're going through the job search process. Where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? The trap people fall into is to focus on job title. And I think that's a bad idea because it can backfire in a bunch of different ways. So in 5 years, I'd like to be associate director. In 10 years, I'd like to be director. What if it takes 4 years to become director in that company, and you're like, ugh, that guy's lazy? Or if you sound overambitious because the person you're talking to, it took 20 years to become director, and they're like, well, this guy's coming for me. I think and plus just at this point in your career, you don't really know, you can't know what that director probably even does for sure. So it sounds like a not very useful answer to just say that, although that's what a lot of websites will say to do. You should sound ambitious, so tell them you want to do something even higher than what you think you'll be doing. I think that's probably bad advice. And I think a way to sound more mature and like you better thought this through is to sort of focus on what sort of outcomes or characteristics of your ideal job should look like instead of job titles. So think about what intrinsic rewards or outcomes you want from your work, and if you don't know, go to this My IDP tool that we talked about earlier and complete the values assessment, and then take a look at the 5 or 6 items, rewards or outcomes from work that you rated as top for yourself. This is what I most want from my work in the future, and then build your response out of that. This is a good way to sound authentic. So where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? It's difficult to predict the exact title or position I'm going to have in the future. I hope that I'll be playing some sort of leadership role within a research enterprise. But whatever that job title is, for me, it's really rewarding when I'm recognized as an expert or in a skill or knowledge. So I hope in 5 years, I can build a reputation for deep expertise in some area. Also, it's going to be really rewarding if in 5 to 10 years I could have realized that all the work that I do has developed into some sort of a product that's going to make a positive difference for patients. That's why I got into science in the first place. One thing that draws me to this, so back to our pivot, right? And you're tying it back to the position. One thing that draws me to this particular position and this company is that it seems like all of these goals are possible to achieve. So again, you'll have to put it in your own words, but you can see how that sounds, this person's still ambitious, right? They're not sounding lazy, but they're also not shooting themselves in the foot with something, and it sounds, you kind of believe this guy, right? So that's why I would try to focus on these sort of qualities. Questions about that? Okay, we'll move on to the hard stuff, which is these interpersonal skills and team fit questions, which are almost always asked in a very structured interview process through asking you to tell stories about your past behaviors. So there's all kinds of evidence that says people are creatures of habit. Past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. And the companies will create what are called behavioral interview questions. Give me an example of a time when you had to manage competing priorities effectively. Give me an example of a crisis situation you've handled successfully. Tell me about a tough group you had to get to cooperate with you. What was that about, and how did you go about getting them to do these tasks? So when you start seeing and hearing interview questions that are tell me about a time, give me an example of a time, so it's past tense, and they're asking for stories, then you'll know, okay, we switched into these behavioral style questions, and I should use this framework, I'll come back to these in a minute, called situation, task, action, result. So when you start hearing, give me an example of a time, that's your trigger to start, STAR answers, S-T-A-R. So we'll practice this in a minute, but a little bit about these questions is you probably won't get behavioral questions about the science, like the techniques or the bench work. It's almost always about how you are as a person, how you work as a team, how you communicate. And there are always questions about your past behaviors to see if you have demonstrated these behaviors considered critical for success in the job. So they actually will say, a scientist 1 needs to be able to do these things in addition to being a good scientist. They have to be able to delegate effectively. They have to be able to have constructive arguments about results and data without blowing up or without feeling insulted. They have to be able to present their research to sell up the ladder, as well as convince people to do things for them. So they'll have 10 or 12 critical behaviors that you have to be able to demonstrate, and then they'll just ask direct questions about them. Give me an example of a time when you had an argument with a superior about data. You felt it was one way and they felt it was the other. How did you come to an agreement? There's nothing hidden there. They're just asking, have you done that successfully in the past? And the traps people fall into are answering, yes, I've done that all the time. And they're like, tell me more. So not understanding that this is storytelling time, and then they have to really drag it out of you. Another trap that people fall into is dragging on with the story, rambling on, taking forever, not getting to the point, forgetting what the point was. Another trap that people fall into is not having enough stories to tell. And so we're going to do a little practice and talk about how to answer these, but I'll try to address all those traps before we're done here. Let's see. So there's several of these typical questions. There are more at this website. If you go to our office website, click on PhDs and non-academic careers, there's actually a list of 15 questions that were taken from we asked our students and postdocs who have been interviewing, send in questions you actually got asked, and then we actually got a hold of a couple of scripts from companies, and we found that there's a whole lot of similarity between the questions, and most of them were some variety of these 15 questions. So I'll come back to that one in a minute. But when you hear when you hear questions going down this path, give me an example of a time questions. Go to this situation, task, action, result format. And this will help you with the rambling part, is like, okay, I'm going to set up the situation so they understand what the story was about, and then I'm going to boil it down to, which this reminds me to not ramble, I'm going to tell them what I'm going to tell them. So I knew I had to do this. And then the action, it's called the behavioral style question. The action is the behavior. This should probably be the most time-consuming part of your response. And it should be at a level of detail that almost seems boring. You don't want to totally have the person glaze over, but they need to know details because you're trying to give them a mind picture of how you behaved in that setting. And then the result, you always want to sort of end up with a positive something at the end that's quick, but lets them know that it was successful. As an example, if this question was, give me an example of a time when you had to manage competing priorities effectively, it's a pretty small font, but I'll go ahead and read it. As a graduate student, I've had to manage multiple projects at one time, some of my own, and some of which were collaborations with other researchers, all in the past year. I was wrapping up in the past year, I was wrapping up a set of experiments for a first author paper. At the same time, I was collaborating with a postdoc in another lab on some animal studies. In both cases, there was a sense of urgency to get results. So, boiling it down, I knew if I didn't organize my time carefully, I wouldn't be able to hit my deadlines. So I'm going to tell you how I organized my time. The animal studies were time-consuming, requiring daily measurements. Therefore, first I met with my postdoc collaborator and set up a schedule that divided the responsibilities for that project and set sub-deadlines for each step. Then I sat down and mapped my manuscript-related deadlines on top of that other list. This ensured that we would complete the experiments in a timely manner and allowed me the time I needed to complete my independent experiments and draft a manuscript. So in the end, we submitted manuscripts for both sets of experiments within a month of each other, and both have been accepted for publication now. One is even going to be in a top journal. So you kind of see how the structure goes, how it flows. It's a little long and maybe a little too detailed, it feels like. But if you made this more brief, an interviewer is going to be like, well, I didn't quite get how you did that. Tell me a little bit more. So they'll go back and probe some more. And every answer doesn't have to end with a science paper, but so they don't have to be super glorious stories. They can be pretty mundane. As you can see, this probably pretty much was until the science paper ended it. So questions about this before we practice? Uh-huh.
Usually how big of a situation needs to be? Like this seems like a pretty big situation. How about just like, oh, a student you manage and your boss have concerns, or like
Say what?
so how important the story is in your life?
How do they all have to be major
Like
things?
major, minor, or just like everyday stuff?
Everyday stuff. They should be work related. So often the question comes up, can I draw something from my personal life? Maybe if it was something that was like a volunteer experience, but I wouldn't go actual personal life stuff. Like, did you have a conflict with someone? Yes, my spouse and I fight all the time. Probably not the way to go. Yeah. Other questions before we practice? Okay. Can you guys read that in the back? Skim through these questions and pick one that you think is easy to answer. None of them are super easy. And try writing down in this STAR format, situation, task, action, result. I'll put that back up after you all have picked a question. Write out your bullets, and then we'll practice if we have time. I think we have time. Everybody have their question? Does anybody not have their question yet? I'll move to the, okay. Try to pick your question soon and start writing out your situation, task, action, result. Give you a couple minutes to draft your response. Is it okay if I move to the slide to give you the formula? Does anybody not have their question still? Okay. We'll leave this up so you have a framework to go through. Try to get your outline written in about another minute or less. Doesn't have to be word for word. In case you didn't hear me in the back, we'll move on in about 45 seconds. Okay, so I know some of you are long done and some of you haven't finished yet in terms of writing everything out, but I'd still like to give everybody a chance to practice this. So go ahead and pair up again. I'll help you get pairs if you need it. And again, do the mock interview thing. Have your partner ask the question that you picked, give your response, and then ask your partner for some feedback. What did I do well? Did it fit the star? Did I stick to the star story? Did you get lost? Did you believe it? Did it sound credible and answer the question? How could the story have been better? And then switch partners and have your partner practice too. And we'll try to move pretty quick through this, so we'll give about 3 minutes, and then I'll call time, and then other partner can talk for 3 minutes. Okay? Oh, uh-huh. Can he listen in with you guys? Oh, she's coming back? Okay. You need a partner? Oh, okay. Oh, she just left? Okay. Well, let me see if someone else needs one. Oh. Excuse me. Can you partner with this guy back here? That way we get two. Right. This very nice person here. Thank you. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Well, we might have to have it.
It just flipped off all of a sudden. I was just like,
where'd it go? Yeah, I accidentally forgot to. Yeah.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure. Like I said, there's no.
It's weird because I can't. It seemed.
I hear you some anyways right now.
Okay. Okay. We're good. I keep forgetting.
Yeah, it's alright.
Okay, make sure the other partner gets to talk too. 3 more minutes. 3 minutes.
question. So I have a really good answer, I think, for number 4, which is what's been your greatest challenge thus far? So I'm a PhD student. But I'm not really sure. I think it's a good example, but maybe it's not actually a good example. So basically, halfway through my PhD, so I'm going to my 5th year now. In my 3rd year, I was working on a completely different thesis topic, and it was with a collaboration, and the collaboration ended up going like basically totally south, where the PIs started fighting with each other, and saying, okay, you stole data from me, you did this, you did that. And I basically was like, okay, I can either stick with this project for my thesis and kind of get some crappy project in the end, or I can just pivot completely to another project in the lab. And so I decided, okay, I really have to move because this is just too toxic of an environment. And it ended up working out. My current thesis is just way better than what it would have ended up.
So the result is good?
Yeah, the result was good. I don't know if that's such a good example, though, because I don't want them to think like, okay, he cuts losses when he thinks it's not going to work out or something. But I also think maybe that's a good skill to have. I don't know. Maybe or is that too heavy of an example? Maybe like would they be looking for something more like?
No, I think. What's the second? How you attempt to meet a challenge. I would just be transparent with them, tell them what you or not transparent, explicit. Tell them what you think this should demonstrate about you. I guess perseverance, ability to make good out of bad. But then I would also make it really clear without sounding bitter. I think that's the hard part of the story. maybe, and I don't know the whole situation, but make it clear that it wasn't your fault, without making it sound bitter. Yeah. So that's the part of the story that could, in the situation part, that could take a long time. But I think that's what you'd probably have to carefully craft, is make sure the message isn't that you had nothing to do with that drama. But you could even say that explicitly. The drama was way above me, but it affected the way I was doing my. And perseverance, and you didn't take the easy. Like there's probably, yeah. So I think that's, to me, that's, if there's no hidden agenda there, but that's probably what they want to hear is, does he take the easy way out, which probably was not what you did, right? So, yeah. If I can have your attention back. There's a question back there, I think. We'll go ahead and move on. I'll take questions in a minute, but the main purpose of this exercise is because usually when people start talking, concerns or questions come up that you can then ask or focus on later. But even more than that, you probably realize how useful it is to practice these answers with someone and get structured feedback, which is really what you have to invest some time in as you're preparing for your actual real-life interviews. So the question at the back.
Is like you following the STAR, like the format. Is it always need to be a successful example?
Oh, does the result always have to be positive?
Okay, or is always need to be positive?
I think the result also always has to demonstrate the behavior, but and without going into too much specifics, if it results in, if you're doing experiments in this story and those failed, I mean that happens all the time, so no big deal. If that wasn't, but if the story has to successfully demonstrate that you can do that behavior, so if the part that is failing is that it looks like you can't do that behavior, don't tell that story. Yeah, obviously. Did I answer your question? Yeah, it doesn't always have to be a happy ending, but it has to demonstrate that you can do the behavior. Other questions this is brought up? Anything else? So,
How long should your answer be?
Yeah. Oh, so how long should the answer be?
How long should the answer be, or
how short? So I think you should have a fair amount of detail in your head ready to tell about this story, but also pay attention to the interviewer, and if they're checking their watch or looking at sports scores, that's a definite signal that you went too long. But I would have the situation part be pretty explicit and clear, and the behavior part be the part maybe that you're ready to tell in modules, because most of these big companies especially train their interviewers to do these questions, these behavioral questions, and sometimes all the behavioral questions will come from an HR person. Other times, as you're going through the day at a company visit, you'll talk to the scientists and they'll be like, all science, fun, talk, and then they'll be like, okay, I also have to ask these HR questions, and then they have like these behavioral things that they jump. Give me an example of a time when you did that. Either way, they have some training in how to do this, and if you didn't give enough behavior in the action part, they'll ask more questions. And so if you fear that you're going to be boring by going on too long, I would say go a little light on the action part, but then be prepared to say more when they probe. And too long is probably more than, when you're talking for 2 minutes in an interview, it's a long time. May not feel like it, but, so you should stop, you should have some stops in there before 2 minutes, I think.
What would you suggest is something to do if you come up against a question that you don't have, at least it doesn't come to mind, situation or story?
Yeah, so I'll answer your question, but first, one thing you'll notice about these stories as you start, like I would pick 10 or as many as you can and actually write out a star result as part of your preparation for these interviews. And one of the things you'll find is a lot of the stories that you create are portable to other questions. So you created a story about, prioritizing things, but along that process you had to like prioritize them for people, so you can actually tell that same scenario as part of your delegation question. So you'll find that if you go into an interview with 6 or 7 stories to tell, you'll be able to probably, especially if you're going around the day, you're like, I told this situation over and over again, but it's a different person every time, so they didn't know, and they're not going to all get together and talk later about, he kept telling that story about. So probably, I don't know, I'm going to guess a few stories, a half dozen stories that you can draw different characteristics from, different behaviors from, is probably enough. So in answer to your question, though, suppose you can't come up with a story that demonstrates the behavior that they've asked about. I think the best things are first to ask the interviewer to say more, because a lot of times as they're explaining their rationale for asking this question, by saying more, can you, I'm having a hard time coming up with a story, that's fine to say, to tell about this. I'm sure I've done that, but I just can't think of something. Can you tell me how that behavior plays out in the job, because maybe that'll help trigger me to tell a story. So again, you're just being very transparent with them. I'm having a hard time, can you help me? They don't want you to, they're not trying to trick you, they don't want you to fail. They just want to see if you have done this thing before. So sometimes when they say, oh, well, this is how it often happens, is you have to delegate to multiple people, and we have a matrix structure, and that means not people don't work for you, and suddenly you're like, oh, I had to ask this person in another lab to do something, and they didn't work for me. So that can often happen. If you still can't tell a story, then tell them that you just can't come up with something, but you'd like to explain how you would do it. So the whole purpose of this past tense storytelling is that you actually have to tell things you've done, so it's more credible that you do it. But if you completely can't come up with something, demonstrating that you know how to do it effectively would be the best next suggestion. The best next suggestion. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Or no. Uh-huh. So if it's an ethics question?
Or she or he is not doing the right experiment, or is fake data or something like that.
So the question is, if someone is doing the wrong experiments or doing things wrong, or they're faking data or something like that. So I'll say 2 things. One is, if they ask a question like that, it's a hypothetical question, right? That wasn't actually a past tense behavioral question. But the reason I bring this up is because sometimes interviewers will do that, and the easy response would be, well, this is what I would do. So you answer a hypothetical question with a hypothetical answer. A more credible thing would be to say, actually, I've been in that case before. So you go back to your past tense behaviors, because it's always more believable and credible and demonstrable if you tell a past tense thing, a situation that you've been in the past. So if possible, say, well, I've been in a situation like that before. This is what I did. I think the question, an ethics question in science, it depends on what the story, how you behaved, I guess. But if it turned into something whistleblowing, well, so one thing, I haven't heard of this question being asked like that before, but not for company interviews. But I think you would say, I would focus on what you did if it was in a situation, if it was something that you think you behaved maturely and took the right response. So I guess in an ethics question, if you sought the advice of other mentors and then came to a positive outcome, confronted the person in a positive way, that's a great story to tell, and you'd want to talk about that. If it didn't go well, then I would try to deflect a little bit. But I think that the closest question on here that I can think of might be the ones about conflicts. And those are tough questions because you want to focus on the outcome and how it was resolved. And you want to make sure that the conflict was around something data-oriented or work-oriented and not interpersonal-oriented, because that brings up all kinds of other questions about how you behave in work and what you define as conflict. So for the conflict questions, try to focus on work-related objective kinds of conflicts. Any more?
If they like to hear that we go to that person and resolve the problem, or we report to the boss, which one they like more?
Oh, so in a conflict, do you go do you solve it first on your own, or do you go to the boss? Those might be tiered, but I say in most employment situations, they want to hear how you worked on things yourself first. But this is highly situational, so if you want to follow up on a question on that, I'd be happy to talk more about it. Any other questions about this? It's hard, right? And so you really have to prepare for these, but everybody that I've talked to says if the company is big enough to have an HR function, they're going to go through this process because it works. When there's all kinds of organizational psychology and human resources field data that shows if you look at the different techniques people use for selection processes in companies, behavioral questions come out as the most predictive of success on the job. So if you've demonstrated that you can do all these behaviors and you can do the science, we can predict that you're going to be successful. If they ask hypothetical questions, it's less predictive of success on the job. If they ask random questions, less predictive than on the job. If they don't ask these questions, not so predictive just because you can do the science. The only thing that's more effective at predicting success on a future success on a job in the selection process is if they have you do an internship or a project and you actually try out in the job. It's the only thing that's more predictive. So people use this because it works, and that's why you should prepare. So kind of killed that one. Let's see, we'll move on to finish. Questions. So the last section we talked about having these opening questions, these team science or team effectiveness and interpersonal questions like the behavioral style questions. And then there's always going to be time at the end of an interview for you to have some questions. Go in with a whole list of questions. It's not, it doesn't look bad for you to say, I'm sure I have some questions, but I need to check my list. Great. It looks like you're enthusiastic and organized if you have come in with a whole list ahead of time. You could base questions, some simple questions. What are the day-to-day responsibilities at the beginning? The farther you get through the process, the more you'll want to dig into the actual job. And ask your boss, the future boss, before you go to the full day interview, make sure you've asked your boss what are the priorities for the position and challenges faced by the group. Because then you're going to be able to build information on your job talk, other responses to other people, quoting back to the boss, well, I understand that this is a challenge the group is working on. Here's how I can think and address it. I'll say more about this shortly. For phone interviews, if possible, make sure that you have a good signal and that you're very clearly understandable. But the biggest thing is sometimes, surprisingly often, they call you first rather than just send an email saying we'd like to talk to you. So I'm surprised how often that happens, that they'll not schedule something but kind of call you. And you don't have to take that phone call. You don't have to finish the phone call. All you have to do is express enthusiasm and ask to set another time. So if they surprise you by your phone starts ringing, you're in lab, just say, I'm really excited. I was hoping to be able to talk to someone about this position. I'm in the middle of something right now. Can we schedule a time to call back later? Because you can never perform as well when you're caught by surprise as you could if you have some time to go, to a place where there's a good signal and go back to the job description and read it. Oh, these are the things that I think I'm most qualified for this job. Get yourself organized and then call them back. Realize that when you're on the phone, 2 minutes, if we talk about a 2-minute response being long, it even seems longer if there's one-way communication on a phone or a Skype even. So it's a little better on Skype, but on the phone especially, stop frequently and ask, have I answered the question? Should I say more? And they'll tell you. And then also, if this goes on for longer than 15 or 20 minutes, you're sitting in a chair, you're starting to slump down, your voice is going to go with it. Stand up, walk around, look in front of a mirror, smile, because it actually makes you sound more animated. It really works. And remember that it makes a difference to sound animated and enthusiastic on the phone. For these site visits, again, this is something that people don't do, and it feels uncomfortable, but I think you should do it. At some point before your visit, ask the scientist boss, preferably, what the priorities for the position are. So you'll get a description of the job and the work from the human resource people, but make sure you've asked the actual boss, what are things that you're working on? And then again, you can refer these to the interview. What are the things that you're challenged by, or what do you hope this person addresses first? And a lot of times this might feel uncomfortable, but an email to the boss in advance, say, I'm looking forward to my visit on next Tuesday. And as I prepare, I'd like to be as prepared as possible. So I was wondering if you'd be willing to answer a few questions for me so that I can tailor my responses during the day. And they may or may not have time to get back to you, but this will not reflect badly on you. So trying to be organized and prepared never makes you look bad. And then also do some reading on the company's business and history, because you'll have time built into the day during which there's social time or just conversational time. And so being able to ask questions about this new drug they have in phase 3, or what does this development mean for the group that you'll be working in, that kind of stuff. For the job talk, I guess the traps people fall into are giving your most recent, conference talk as your job talk at, Amgen, probably a mistake. Instead, it's sort of less about your current research project and more about you, if that makes sense. So people who have done this successfully tell us that I've tried to weave my whole story as a scientist up to this point into what I've done. So it's not just about my own project, and it's not project. It's kind of how I've developed skills that are going to be relevant to this job. Realize that you might have, especially at smaller companies, totally non-scientists in your group, so ask about that. That would be another question you want to ask for. Who will be in my talk? What backgrounds? Because you'll want to start big enough to bring everybody along if you need to do that. There should be less data, so you want to have slide after slide of data and information. Instead, more history and information about yourself. And then oftentimes I hear science talks where, it's at a conference and we're talking about what our group has done. It has to be really clear what you've done, because Amgen is not hiring your whole lab. They're just hiring you. So they need to understand what you've been able to do. And then a lot of times a science talk, academic science talk will be lots about what we're doing in the future. But if you go to that company, your future in this project is going to go away. You're going to be working on their work. So they will care less about all these great plans you have for the future. But it would be useful for you to wrap up with this, turning back to what you understand the challenges are the group are facing, and how you hope your story has demonstrated that you can work effectively on those to solve those problems and help them move forward. So these points came actually from hiring managers in companies that we asked them about what makes a good science talk. And there's a slide deck on our website about this that gives more data. And then just to kind of wrap it up, first impressions, last impressions, it seems, I guess, I don't know, like a pat thing to say, but practice your handshake. It makes a difference. You're going to meet a lot of people during the day and shake hands with them. Make sure you can practice doing eye contact and a firm handshake. It makes a big difference. And then, probably more importantly, last impressions. People never think about this. Like, I go through an interview. I ask them. They ask me a bunch of questions. They ask me if I have questions. I ask them a couple, and then awkward moment. I didn't think about how I'm going to get out of this. So actually, plan your exit so that it's nice and smooth and professional, and come up with a little brief statement that feels comfortable to you to say in your own language, that you can say when they're like, so do you have any more questions? Well, no, I have no more questions. I think you've answered them all, but I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed talking with you, and I really hope to be able to move on to the next step in this process. So again, something that seems comfortable for you, but you might say that 8 times during the day. That's okay. They're again not going to get together and talk about that, and it's just a smoother way than sounding passive and saying, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'm great talking to you. See ya." It doesn't land as well. Make sure you send thank you notes quickly, an email, thank you email to everyone. I think people always ask, should I just send it to the boss or to all 8 people? It doesn't have to be long, and if you don't send it and you're their top candidate, they're not going to say he didn't send thank you notes. We're going to take the next candidate. But it just makes a more professional impression of you if you fire off a 2-line thank you note to every person the next day. And then, yeah, I'll just wrap up with a question that always gets asked. What's your greatest weakness? How do I answer this question? If you look online, they always like tell a story about, tell them how great you are at something, but make it sound like a weakness, or tell them a strength. Tell them, yeah, I don't know what, the advice doesn't even make sense to me. Say something that is actually a strength, but you projected it as a weakness. Like, I'm a perfectionist. I think your future boss would be like, how is that bad for me? Or, I work too hard. How is that bad for me? And I think if you do something like that, and you're talking to scientists, the BS meter is pretty sensitive, so people will be like, okay, what's your real weakness? So I think a better thing to do that's more honest and transparent and authentic is to actually come up with something that you've worked on, but the framework here, or the trick or thing to remember is try to talk about it in sort of past tense, and describe what you did to fix it, so that it sounds like it's not going to be a problem that craters you in this job. And really what they're trying to do, well, I guess sometimes people answer this question with something that's so awful that it craters them, right? So don't come up with a torpedo answer. I can't get up in the morning, or I'm always late, or I don't know, something that really would disqualify you from the job. People do say this sometimes. I'm a career counselor, and we were hiring a career counselor once. In an interview, she was doing pretty well, and she actually said, she told a story where her weakness basically was that she always had a falling out with her boss in all of her past jobs. And the way she told the story was kind of to make herself sound like she's always right. But there were so many things wrong with it. We're like, you did the torpedo answer, and you're a career counselor. You shouldn't have done that. You should know her. But a better thing would be, a better way to approach this. What they're really looking for is, are you self-aware enough to figure out when you have problems? And once you know you have problems, can you fix them? And I think that's really why these people ask this question. It's not, they don't really expect you to torpedo yourself. So you might say, by semi-past tense, well, something that I've been working on is ability to prioritize. Sometimes I find in the lab there's many things going on, and then I get assigned other things, and it has been difficult for me to get as much done during that day as I would like to have. Therefore, recently I bought a notebook and I started writing stuff down. Whatever your process is, go back to the star answers and move to that semi-past tense. And then it should be, and so I'm seeing this work a lot better for me. It doesn't seem like it's such a problem as it was before. Does that make sense? Semi-past tense, what you're doing to fix it or what you've done to fix it, and then it's really not a problem anymore. Make sense? So that's all I have for interviews, unless you have, I'll take a couple minutes for questions, then we'll take a short break and come back and talk about money. We may have 3 or 4 minutes for questions before we break. Kind
of going back to some of the behavioral questions, I'm assuming that if you're telling a couple stories, you don't want 3 stories that are just highlighting highlighting your ability to be a mediator. You kind of want to showcase different skill sets. Do you have like a list of some of those skill sets that we should, try to develop stories to explain?
Not specifically, but I would draw them from the list of 15 questions. And those really are like, we had 2 company scripts, biotech company scripts that were like almost identical, and then the questions that kept coming in from trainees were all basically the same. So I think that list that we had up there is a pretty solid list of what behaviors they're looking for the sort of entry-level scientist role. I don't mean to cop out of your answer, but I think, so I don't have that specific list, but I would glean it from the 15 question list. Other questions? Difficult situation questions, things you don't want to be asked. I got it.
So I guess kind of go back to her question. So is there a right answer, or what type of behavior you want to show through those questions? Will give you plus, not like people questions that, okay, are you really a team player, or what's the right answer? Better answer, I guess.
I'm not sure I understand there's not a best answer because by definition they're about your past. So as long as you're telling honest stories, the only thing you can do that's really bad is say, I can't think of anything, so I'm going to make one up, because this whole probing and asking more questions, you're going to get, ooh, that's going to be bad. Eventually they're going to ask you to tell some detail, and you're like, I don't know, or you'll contradict yourself. So I'm not answering your question, but there is no right answer because it's about you.
What kind of quality, I guess, what they're trying to see through these questions?
I think I understand where you guys are going. There's no trick. So they're not trick questions. They'll explain this. Like, we're not looking for. There's no trick here. The question is about the behavior that we want to see. So if it's about can you delegate, you tell a story that you've delegated effectively, and that's pretty much it. So, Oh, there's one back there.
So I wonder whether is it better or worse to mention about the family? Like, what if you have a wife or have children? Is it bad or good to mention that?
So yeah, great question. So it's actually illegal in some states for them to ask questions about family. I don't think I would bring it up, but it often comes up innocently in those social settings. You're out to lunch and with a group, and someone who's not even one of your bosses, you're having lunch with a text from the group, and they're like, so you got kids? Or it becomes uncomfortable to tell a story about what you did last weekend because it was all with your kids or whatever. So I wouldn't go out of my way to avoid it, but I wouldn't make it a specific point in the interview. If some companies have like spouse relocation programs, which means you're bringing a spouse with you to this new city. They'll set you up with job search counselors and all kinds of stuff that they'll pay for in order to make it. So there might be all kinds of benefits that you'd want to find out about, but I wouldn't bring those up specifically until it's job offer time, basically. So they probably won't ask you explicitly. It might come up on the side. Don't go out of your way to avoid talking about it. And in most cases, not to go into too much detail, we asked 100 graduate students and postdocs. We asked 100 postdocs how many people in their academic careers had been asked in a job interview, like for their postdoc positions, if they had family plans, any of these illegal kind of questions, and like 75% of them said yes, they had been. That doesn't happen in companies, so they're coached interviewers. They they actually want you to be, have a balanced life and have, and so it's not, I don't put it in my talks because it comes up sometimes, but it's not a problem generally. I'd say in 15 years, I can think of a couple postdocs or students who have said, I went to this company interview and they asked me and it made me uncomfortable. So I think it's not something you should definitely try to avoid, but don't bring it up unless it's comfortable in a social kind of setting. A few years ago, there was a postdoc who went to an interview at a company. She just had twin boys and had lots of difficulty with her academic PI, trying to balance her new parent care issues out. And so she came back from the interview, and the boss had walked her out to her van, and she came in the next day. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I think I screwed it up because I forgot to take the child seats out of my van, and he must have thought that I'm going to be a terrible worker because I'm too dedicated to my kids." And I'm like, "No, it's not like that. It's not. Stop overreacting." And it turned out she got the job offer, and they're all kinds of flexible for her, and so it's just a different kind of environment in a corporate setting. So I'd say for the most part, don't worry about the personal illegal questions.
So I have a question in terms of the behavioral questions.
Mm-hmm.
When they come ask you about like difficulties or tough people, can we come up with some situations not in the academic environment, like some tough people you met in your life?
Yeah. So can you respond to questions like behavioral questions like can you talk about a difficult person you had to deal with, for example, that wouldn't be from a work setting? Yeah, I think so. We've mentioned that at the beginning. I wouldn't go too personal, and I would make it relate like you found them difficult because of something that's related to work, roughly, like a personal friend that's always late, and how you've worked with them to not become late all the time, for example, would be maybe we can tie that to a work kind of setting, but I wouldn't go too negative on that, and I wouldn't go too personal. Does that make sense? And I would always pretty much stay away from spouse and partner stories. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break and come back at 4:15, and we'll wrap up by 5 with talk about money. Okay. We'll go ahead and move on and finish up by talking about industry compensation negotiation. And when you get this job offer, which will happen for all of you eventually, how do you ask for more? How do you know whether it's a good job offer? Where do you find information about all these things? And we'll talk about 5 different components. And the first is what happens when money comes up during the interview. So this is before you get the job offer. And a fairly common question that companies will ask is, so if we're to move on to a job offer stage, what are your salary requirements? And you're like, so be prepared for that. And we'll also talk about what happens when money comes up at the time of the job offer. So the company calls you and say, we're going to make you a job offer, here's the money. What do you think of that? And how do you respond in that situation? And then when you get the job offer, what's going to be in it? And then negotiation content. So of those things that are in your job offer, which ones can you ask for more of after the job offer? And then most importantly, how do you ask for it? So what words do you say to keep the process positive and keep you in a good relationship with your future boss and HR people and still get you what you need and want? So difficult interview question. If we were to move forward to the job offer stage, what would be your salary requirements? I guess the rule here is to try to get out of the question first by not actually saying anything. Responding to the question without quoting an actual figure. And then if they keep going, if your response isn't sufficient, then come up with a range rather than saying a specific number. So it might sound something like this. I'm very interested in this position for all of these great reasons, the science, the people, et cetera. And if we were to move forward to an offer, I simply hope that an offer will be made for a salary amount that is competitive for my background and experience. And sometimes they'll be, okay, great, negotiable on their form. So sometimes the HR people, they have to ask this question because that's what they always do in an interview. And maybe that's sufficient. And then you've saved yourself for later when the goal here really is to get the company to make the offer first. But sometimes they'll say, well, I have a form, I have to fill out something. Can you be a little more specific than saying nothing? And then you'll say, well, for me, the most important thing is to be able to accept a job where, I can work on good science or, have great colleagues. And these issues are more critical than the exact salary figure. But from what research I've been able to do, it seems like salaries are falling in the mid to upper 90s for a position like this with a major employer and for someone with my general background. And so I've never heard them say, yeah, but what exact number do you need? So I think this broad general language is about as good as you can do if they ask that. So where you should get this information is sometimes websites are okay, but I wouldn't quote a website in a salary discussion with a human resource person because things like salary.com, Glassdoor, they're either too specific, like it's representing one person's reported job posting or job salary level, or they're too broad, like with salary.com, you can actually get some pretty interesting data by putting in the biotechnology section and the scientist job titles. But those are national salary surveys that they draw from, and so they're not. And they may be normed with a cost of living multiplier. So you might say, well, the data you get from some of these salary sites might say, well, if you're going to move to the Bay Area, where it's ridiculously expensive, and we do the salary multiplier, a scientist one should be at like 180 or something, because that's what the cost of living multiplier would be. But the cost of living multipliers are not all right for a variety of reasons, and so you might quote something way too high. So I wouldn't say I use salary.com and it said I should make 150 or 180 or something. Instead, the better place to get research is find a couple people who have left a couple years ago and ask them what a position like this should make. So as you're going through the interview process, write to somebody who left your lab or left your group last year or the year before and say, hey, I got great news. I'm interviewing for a job at this company in this city. What do you think it should pay? So don't ask them how much they make, but they'll be pretty knowledgeable about what competitive salaries are, and they'll be able to give you some useful information. And then we'll talk about how to bring that up in another slide. So best thing to do is get that data before you go so that you know generally how to answer this question if you're asked. But if you're not asked, don't bring up money before the job offer, even if you know it's a big concern for you because you're nervous about moving to the Bay Area and you know it's really expensive and you want to know if they're going to be competitive. Doesn't help you to ask about this before the interview or before the job offer. So then the next time money comes up is when the job offer is made. And usually the company will call you. It's often your future boss. And they'll be all enthusiastic. You did a great job. Everybody's really excited about your talk. We'd love to have you come in. We're going to extend a job offer. And then they're going to give you a bunch of details about it. So who you're going to report to, when your start date will have to be, how much money it is, all these different things. And especially if it's the HR person calling, they'll ask you to accept the job offer on the phone. So is this something you think you could accept? And you might be like, well, yes, except for this one factor. Then you put yourself in a bad position for asking about anything else. The best thing to do is just ask for everything in writing. And if there's a term in the offer that they've mentioned that doesn't meet your needs, don't bring that up. Don't say, this is not something we talked about. If it's something you agreed with your boss on, the start date, for example, and then the HR person gave you a different start date, don't bring it up then. Just say, well, this is really great news. I also felt like there's a great potential fit, so you're not accepting the job offer. And I really appreciate everything you've done to coordinate the process so far. This is probably the HR person you're talking to. Would it be possible to send everything you've just described to me in a quick email? It'd be really helpful if I could take a look at all the details together, and then I'll be able to reorganize any questions or organize any questions I might have and respond by whatever their deadline is. So they'll always say, we need to know by this time. So then they'll send you an email with the details, or sometimes even a formal letter through FedEx or something that has a place for you to sign on it. And it'll have at least this information in it, the job title and the classification, so Scientist 1, for example, the start date, who you're going to report to, what the salary is, other types of money involved, a signing bonus or an annual bonus structure will be explained. If there's stock involved in the company, even if it's a public company or private or pre-IPO company, and then some overview of the benefits, and there's probably a packet of information in there with you about the healthcare package. So we'll talk about a couple of these things, and then we'll go into more detail about a couple of these things, and then talk about what you could ask for. The first thing is entry-level salaries. They're usually arranged within a classification. So if your job that you're being offered is Scientist 1, they'll probably say all Scientists 1 in this company make 90 to 110,000. And we like to offer to begin with, at the 50th percentile, so that you have some room to grow, but you're not starting at the very bottom. So halfway between that would be 100,000. So we're going to offer this person 100,000, and that's kind of our general approach. So they probably have a target point within this classification range. If you're like, well, I really wanted to make 120,000, and the job is Scientist 1, that company's policy would probably, you can't do that unless you move to a different job title. So if you were Scientist 2, you could make 120, but this is a Scientist 1 job. So when they say, that's some salaries are out of range, they're probably telling you the truth with this. Companies sometimes quote equity issues. So for equity issues, we can't offer you more money in this case, or we can only offer you a tiny bit more. I think that's also honest. Most companies don't want to offer you more than the person they hired 2 years ago in the same job with the same basic qualifications, because eventually people kind of talk or find out how much they're making, and if that person finds out they're paying you more with less experience, you're not going to be so happy. So most of the time they try to avoid doing that, and sometimes that'll be a response you hear. For equity issues, we can't go above that. However, companies are not out to get you. So they want you to be happy. They're not trying to lowball you and get you for the cheapest dollar they can, because they do these benchmarking surveys that they know that you'll figure out eventually that you're being paid too low if they are trying to screw you over, and you'll leave. And so that doesn't help them after you've been there a couple years and become valuable to the company. Therefore, they pretty much offer salaries in these sort of tight brackets across industries and geographic areas. So if you're moving to one of the big biotech cities, or even Houston's a medium-sized biotech city, I'm sure there's some kind of a consulting firm that sells their services to these biotech companies for benchmarking purposes. So in the Bay Area, you can actually look this company up to see how they do things. It's called Radford Surveys, R-A-D-F-O-R-D. It's pretty interesting. They won't tell you what the salaries are, but they'll describe a little bit about how they work. So Genentech pays them $100,000, and also gives them this giant download of information on all their scientist employees. So people at this title level make this much money with this much background in these kind of roles. If they supervise this many people, it's this much. They have tons of really detailed data about people's jobs, de-identified, but with their salary compensation attached. So then this company takes all this information from all the companies in the Bay Area and aggregates it and spits it back out to the companies, which means they kind of all know what the norms are, and they know that if they offer you something too low, you'll leave, because they know that other companies are paying a lot more. So basically what that means, if you wanted $120,000, but they offered you 80, you're probably not going to get a 50% increase. partly for this reason we talked about before with the ranges, but also because they know they don't have to pay you that much for the same job at the same company. Does that make sense? So all that said, most people, I think, should ask for more because we went back and did a quick study once of people who had asked for more after they got this first job offer of leaving UCSF. And when they got more, it was 3 to 7%. So you're not going to make 120 from 80, but you might, go from, 90 to 95, and that's great, right? That's a big increase, and that's going to add up over the course of your career, and so that's awesome. Oh, yeah.
At that point, do you ask for a specific number, or you just say, how about more?
Good question. We'll get into that. And as funny as it sounds, the answer is kind of the last piece. Especially if the offer is more, I have some direct quotes later, but especially if the offer is competitive, I still think it doesn't hurt to say, is there anything else you can do before I accept this offer? It's not a great negotiating position to be in, but oftentimes it still comes up with we just want to make this person happy, and we want to be happy. So I'll say more about that in a minute. But you wouldn't say I need 6.5% more, right? So that sounds kind of weird. So stock offers then, there's just some questions you'd probably want to pay attention to. Is the language a stock? Does the offer letter say we're granting you stock in this amount, like this many shares, which is we're giving you this stock, it's yours. You don't have to pay anything for it. Or are they giving you the option to purchase stock at a future date? Both of these are good, but this is a lot better because it's free. This is option to purchase stock means there will be a strike price, it's called. So on your first day of work for that month, the company has said the strike, I don't know why they call it a strike price. A share of stock in this company is worth $2, even if the company's not public. Some accountant has said there's so many shares out and we think we're valuing the company at this much, so we're going to say every share you get is worth $1 or whatever. That means as you stay at the company and are able to purchase this stock, if it went public, for example, and a year later you could sell 25% of those shares, and the company's now trading at $10 a share on the actual market, you could sell your 1,000 shares that they gave you for that year for $1,000 and get back an extra 9,000, right? You'd make 10,000. You could sell them for $10,000 even though they cost you $1 each. Does that make sense? You get the point. I'm not sure if I stated that correctly. Most of the time, the vesting period means you get a 25% vest every year for 4 years. That's usually the typical amount. So they'll say, we're giving you 10,000 shares. The vesting rate will be 25% for 4 years. That means every year on your anniversary, you could sell 2,500 shares at the strike price. And if it's more, if selling for more, you could make a bunch of money. If it's selling for less, you want to hold on to those and hope that it goes up. Cash bonuses. There's all kinds of cash bonuses. Sometimes it's a signing bonus, like we're going to send you a check when you sign this as a way to welcome you into the company, or at the end of the first month, you'll get that money. Or we're going to give you a check on your first day, but you'll have to stay for at least a year or pay us back. I've actually never seen a company go after someone. But this is a way to, obviously a way to keep you at the company, just like stock plans are a way to keep you at the company. So you want to ask when you get the money, and it'll be clear in the letter if it's tied to the length of the stay. For people who have computational backgrounds and there's a hot market for you, for example, sometimes companies do exploding bonuses, they call it, which is we know you have other opportunities, so if you sign this offer letter today, we'll give you $10,000. If you sign it tomorrow, you still get the job, but you don't get the $10,000. So pretty high pressure, but wouldn't it be great if we're all that marketable, right? So it's definitely tied to sort of people's backgrounds. And then I don't have this in there, but there are also annual bonus packages where this is pretty common, where some combination of the company's performance goals, if they met all their goals, and if you meet your goals for the year, you get extra money. And then a question to ask, I should have this in there, a question to ask is, for the last 3 years, for people in this role, did they, what percentage of people met their goals and got the full amount? Because sometimes in the negotiation process, the company may offer you less base salary, but have a very generous motivational annual bonus package. And so you're in the negotiation and you ask the HR person, is there any way to move up in the salary? And they're like, well, actually, if you combine the salary and the bonus, this is a better offer than other companies are giving. And then your question should be, but is the bonus paid or not? Like, what am I likely to get the bonus or not? So does that make sense? So then, of all these different items, which things can be negotiable? A few times in all of hundreds of people I've talked to, someone would go back and say, this was a job offer for a scientist 1, but as we were talking, we discussed, the large group I'll be supervising. That sounds more like a scientist 2 position if I look at these other people in the company. Is there anything that can be done to readjust that so it's more equitable? That rarely happens, but I have heard of it. Most of the time, the things that are negotiated for are start date, salary, or bonus. Sometimes people ask for more stock. That's okay. Relocation packages are very negotiable, totally dependent on where you're coming from and what you're bringing with you. The thing that's very infrequently negotiated for is vacation. Like everybody would say, oh, can I have an extra couple weeks? For one thing, that might not be something you want to ask for before you ever start the job. Can I have more time off? Maybe doesn't sound great, but I've seen it mostly only happen when it is flexible around like small companies where they don't have a lot of HR policies. But people are very jealous of their time off, right? And so if they give you 4 weeks and the person at the bench next to you gets 2 weeks, that's not going to make that other person happy. But I have seen people say, I'm from out of the country and I need to take a long period off to go with my family back to visit the rest of my family every year. Would it be possible to be gone for 4 weeks? I'm still going to get my work done and I wouldn't expect to be paid for those extra 2 weeks or whatever it is. So that kind of thing does get negotiated for. Questions about any of this? Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
What is your advice on dealing with competing offers? If you have 2 offers that roughly come in at the same time, pitting them against each other, making them aware that you have another offer coming in, what is the etiquette for that?
I hope you all have that problem. I would say you should definitely pit them against each other. I mean, that maybe sounds negative, but you've worked hard to get to this position in your life. You should make the best out of it. Most of the time when I've seen this happen, the person actually prefers one job. Like usually, most people are like, well, actually, it's pretty clear I'd rather do this job. And it feels disingenuous to go to that person I really want to work for and say, I have this other offer that's more money, or sometimes not even more money, and ask them if they can do something do something for me because of that. But you should do that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's your future boss that you're talking to has probably done that before. So trying to play one opportunity off the other. So I would give them as much time as you can. And even if the other offer isn't firm yet, telling the company that you think another offer is coming, and is that something they'd be willing to talk about? Or if you think that other offer is going to be for more money, then maybe wait till it comes in. And I've also talked to people who feel bad about doing this, but they should do it, is you actually are talking to both of them at the same time, and you never want to lie in a job offer situation, but asking the second company that you don't really want to work for if there's anything else they could do, and then they raise it a little bit, then you take that back to the first company. That's smart business, not That's not screwing them over, right? So it's taking care of yourself, I think, and as long as you're being genuine about this and not telling the company that you don't really want to work for that you're going to accept their offer, I think that's okay. Do people feel differently about that? No? It's hard to do and it makes you feel a little uncomfortable, but if you've gotten in that situation, good for you. Yeah.
I have a question about if and when you get pressured to give a real salary range during an interview or once an offer is coming. What is an ideal range? Like $5,000? Is that a good enough range, or maybe more like $10,000? What is realistic but also specific enough?
So, what kind of a range do you give when they say, okay, you need to say something? I would give a range that's a tiny bit below what you would be willing to take, or what you hope for, I guess, not willing to take. Don't go below your basement, but a little bit lower than what you're hoping for, and 5,000 or so higher. So I was hoping to hit the range of 95 to 100,000. Go broader if you'd like. You probably, for these kinds of jobs, where they actually know probably very closely what they're going to offer you anyhow, because of all those reasons I already mentioned, you can't really mess up too much. There was a postdoc who didn't do her research, was asked that question, and was like, I'm the main breadwinner in my family. I really need to make 120. And this was a few years ago when 120 was even more than it is now. Still pretty generous, but I think, so the company came back, and so she came to my office, she's like, I think I should call them back and say I'll work for less because I don't know where that came from. Everybody tells me that. Then after she did her research, she realized that was inflated. But I was like, no, at this point, just kind of hang on. And they came back to her and they're like, well, we can't offer you what you asked for, and we're pretty far from it, but we can offer you, what we're planning to offer you is 95,000, but what we have done is we've gotten permission to give you access to the company's, it's a upper level home buying package, because her reason was she needs to have enough money to get into a house with her family. And they're like, so what we've done is given you this benefit that normally people a lot higher get in order to get you in the Bay Area and blah, blah, blah. So they came back with something more, and she ended up taking that job. So my point is you probably can't mess up too much as long as you don't sound entitled. Anything else? So we'll move on maybe to talk about how you ask for these things. Some of these questions came up already. So you get the job offer, and you're like, okay, it's pretty good, but I think I would like to ask for more. How do I do that? Probably a sort of overview of how it works. Generally call on the phone, probably talk to the person who signed the job offer letter. That's just sort of etiquette. But this isn't a rule, so if the human resource person signs the offer letter, but you feel like you're really close to the boss already, maybe you talk to the boss. If it's the president of the company that signs all the offer letters, maybe that's not the best person to call back. So not a rule, but generally that's how it goes. Always start out the conversation positive, mention how much you like some aspect of the position, and then provide some sort of an agenda. I have 2 items to discuss, or a couple of clarification questions plus 2 requests, but you want to give the person some kind of a agenda of what's coming so that you're not saying, oh, another thing, and another thing, and another thing, and they're like, when does this end? So tell them at the beginning when it's going to end. And then when it comes to money, mention what leverage you have. So as we've kind of talked about already, if you have a competing offer, that's definitely when you want to bring that up. If you haven't already, leverage to get them to think about things would be statistics, or better, like we mentioned, anecdotal information. If you've talked to people who have gotten jobs recently, that you can say, it seems like based on what those people have have gotten, this is a little bit low. Or at the end, at the least useful in terms of negotiating position is to talk about your own needs. But it's not out of the question if it already seems like the job offer is pretty good, or you can't find competing information that says it's not, and you don't have any other offer, I've definitely seen some of our trainees say things like, you know, I don't own a car and I'm going to have to drive to South San Francisco every day. I don't actually have the money to get into a car. Is there anything that could be done to help me sort of get started in my professional life so I can commute effectively? And then we have all these buses that goes to South San Francisco, so the company is going to say, well, just get on our bus every day. But that one might not work. Ride the Genentech bus. But I've seen people ask for money to buy a car. One person needed to get, she's like, I wear flip-flops and T-shirts to lab every day or whatever, and I need to buy a wardrobe. I'm broke because I've been a student all the time. Is there anything you do so I could start, getting myself into a professional look? Then they came up with something. So all these things are like, this is not their problem that you need to buy clothes, but asking for your own needs might be okay. The biggest one I ever saw was a postdoc who was here from another country and had to run up a bunch of debt because of a bunch of issues that were not really his fault, with money that he couldn't get from his home country. And he had like $20,000 in credit card debt that was just really looming over him. And he asked the company if they would help him pay off his credit card debt. And so they gave him a signing bonus that, they paid for half of it. It was $10,000. So all these things you think, I could never ask for this, but this is a time when they want you to be happy and accept a job offer. $10,000 may not be that much in this case. This true story, this person is actually vice president of that company now. It was 15 years ago. So it paid off for them in terms of making him happy and getting him started in his career. But and he told the story in a way that did make him sound like he was a compulsive gambler. But yeah, so think about what you need, and if you have to ask for it, go ahead and do it at this point. And then ask for what you want in general terms, not the specific number. I'll give some examples here in a second. And encouragingly, and then summarize what everybody's agreed to, and thank the other person, because these HR people will have to go back, check all these salary things, issue new letters. It is some trouble, so make sure you're recognizing that and that you don't act entitled in this process. So we'll just kind of wrap up with running through this sort of step by step. First, decide if you're likely going to accept the job, and if so, do you want to ask for more money? I think people should, but you shouldn't do it to boost your ego. The reason I think you should is because you can often, I would say more than half the time, find a way to get something more, and you all have worked for a long time in difficult jobs for not a lot of money. Maybe this is a time to take care of yourself. And it's very common. All of your bosses in your companies will have asked for more money sometime in their career, so it's not going to be like, who does she think she is? And then if you're going to ask for more, prepare. Write out just bullet points, practice out loud, practice with somebody else to make sure that the request comes out smoothly. And then here's a way that you might prepare in sort of prioritizing your items. Well, first I'm going to ask to clarify about the start date. The boss said it was 1 month, but the letter said it was 2 weeks. And then, the salary's a little lower than what I was hoping for, so I'll ask if I can get more money. If they don't give me that, I'll ask for a signing bonus, and then I'm going to ask them to explain the stock plan. It's not a request, it's just I don't understand it. That might be kind of the bullets there. And then start the discussion on something positive. First of all, I wanted to say again how thrilled I am to have received this offer. And thanks for talking to me today. I do have a number of questions. They run the gamut from salary issues to start date, or I've outlined 2 points along with a couple of clarification requests or questions concerning the items presented in the email. Is this a good time to talk, or do you want to do this by email, etc.? And then when you get to the question about money, my first question is about the salary. The letter you sent specified $90,000. I've done some information gathering online and talking through to colleagues in similar positions, and it seems as if the going rate for this sort of position in the Bay Area and for someone with my background is more in the range of the mid-90s. is there any flexibility level for this position that might bring it closer to this level? So very general language, it's pretty much saying, is there anything else you can do for me, right? And then they'll tell you why some things can or can't be done. In the end, you'll want to end encouragingly and summarize what happened and thank them. So I understand now why we're locked into the start date. It needs to remain as it said in the letter. I really appreciate your willingness to check on flexibility around salary, so they may not say right away what they can do, especially since it requires circling back to the boss about equity issues within the group, et cetera. I'll be prepared to respond quickly when I hear back from you. I'm really excited about wrapping this up and appreciate your help in getting together the information I need to finalize my decision. Is there anything else you need from me at this point? And then last, just kind of wait for the counteroffer. So you've asked for more, and they'll either come back and say, we can't do more, or we've come up with a little bit more. And generally, there's just one major exchange for these entry-level jobs. So as you progress through your career, it might get more complicated in terms of your compensation package and how it's put together. So there might be different components to ask about. But at this point, it's pretty much, here's an offer. Is there anything you can do to give me more? Yes, then you sign the offer letter, or no, and maybe you sign the offer letter anyway. If not, politely turn it down and move on. But most of the people I talk to go into this process intending to accept the offer, and for most of the people who can't get 2 job offers at the same time, it just doesn't work out that way. It may be the only offer you have, and so this is just that process of, hey, is there anything else you can do for me? So just kind of principles to wrap up, make sure that you're using all this positive language at the beginning and the end, appreciate the person's work. Don't push too hard because you'll potentially make the relationship with that HR person, for example, difficult in the future. And then make sure you're clarifying everything in writing and responding. If they don't send you something in writing pretty soon, send a polite note saying, thanks for talking, here's what I understood we agreed on through the chat. Any questions? Guaranteed to work, all of this. It works often.
Follow up on the early session that like the family issue supposed to be brought up later and the visa issue. How could you approach those when you negotiating your offer?
So family issues or visa issues. So family issues, it depends on what those are, I guess. Family issues that I've seen most frequently are flexible work hours. Great time to bring that up is in the negotiation process, but most companies will have described that already for you. We have core work hours of 10 to 3 or something, which means everybody's got to be here 10 to 3, but if you want to work 10 to 7, that's great. If you want to work 8 to 3, that's great. But we need everybody here for these core work hours. That's pretty common, and they'll probably tell you what those policies are in advance. The other thing is help with relocating spouses. And for the most part, academic institutions have these sort of 2-body programs sometimes, but I don't see companies that, they're profit driven, right? So it may not make sense for them to give 2 job offers to a couple, but this would be a time to ask for assistance for your spouse, or a moving package that is sequenced so that it costs a lot for me to move now, can you put me up in a hotel for 3 months because my spouse and kids can't make it in for another 3 months? Those kinds of things could come up in that process, all before you accept the job offer. But that would be the time to bring those up. Did I answer your question? Oh, visa issues. Rare, super rare for it not to come up before this, so they will probably have asked about that and there won't be any surprises. But if it doesn't, you would definitely want to get them to commit to supporting you for visa before you sign the job offer letter. Doing that by presenting yourself as part of the solution, like already talked to, as we talked about earlier, already talked to a employment attorney. It looks like I'm a good bet for this type of visa, or this is what they would recommend. I'm willing to help with this process and do everything I can. How should we go forward with this? I've never seen a company make a new employee pay for their visa. So you don't need to imply that you'll pay for it, but I want to be an active part of this process. I've already talked to an attorney. What do you want me to do? Would be good. One question that almost always comes up is, are they going to rescind a job offer because I asked for more? And I've only seen that happen a couple times, and both times it was because the person didn't do this process, basically, which is really good language, implying that you want to accept the offer and you're just kind of asking if they can do anything more. Both times this happened was with people from countries where people barter for things, and you start out hard and say, this is an insult. Maybe it wasn't quite that strong language, but the person kind of opened the negotiation like, this is way too low, because their custom was, if I tell them it's way too low, I'm likely to get more than if I say it's a little bit low. So the implication that the human resource person heard in both of these cases, though, was we can't make this person happy. And so they took the job offer away because if we can't keep you happy, then if we're so far below, we can't keep you happy, then we should not keep going. So if you do it this way, the company is not going to walk away from an offer because you ask them if there's anything else at this point.
How many people at the same time they offer one job? You know what I mean? If they have one job and they have interviewed 3 persons, is it possible that they offer to more than one person at the same time?
I've never seen that happen. The question is, and then we'll wrap up because I see we're at time. The question is, do companies offer same job to multiple people at a time and it's kind of played off each? I've never seen that happen, but realize that if you get a job, if you interview for a job and it's been a couple of weeks and they said we'll get back to you in 1 week and they haven't heard back, there's a chance that they're waiting, that you might be number 2 and they're waiting to see if that number 1 says no. So I wouldn't be too impatient with them in those kind of cases. So I'll wrap it up. I'm happy to take additional questions one-on-one, but thanks for your time and effort and attention this afternoon. Thanks for role-playing with all those things, and hopefully you got something out of this afternoon, and thank you for coming.